The acrid bite of sulphur, usually a comfort, a familiar signature of her hidden world, today felt like a warning tightening in Lyra's chest. A stray curl, escaping its tight bun, brushed her forehead, damp with the cloying humidity of her subterranean workshop beneath the city of Derinkuyu. Here in the deep, cool earth of Cappadocia, far from the prying eyes on the sun-baked plains above, she could breathe, could work. The air, thick with the metallic tang of heated ores and the subtle, earthy scent of dried herbs, was her element. Around her, clay crucibles glowed with a low, controlled heat, glass retorts bubbled with liquids of unnerving clarity, and meticulously labelled stone jars lined the rough-hewn shelves, a silent testament to years of painstaking labour. Her hands, slender but calloused, moved with a surgeon's precision, grinding a dark, resinous substance in a heavy stone mortar. Each rotation of the pestle was measured, her focus absolute. This wasn't the dramatic, fire-spitting alchemy of charlatans who promised gold from lead. This was the quiet, dangerous art her master, old Elara, had called the Viridian Path, the subtle coaxing of nature's hidden affinities, the unlocking of potent energies from stone, root, and metal. Energies that could heal, or, as Lyra knew too well, destroy. A tremor ran through the packed earth floor, not from the forge fires of the city above, but a deeper, more unsettling vibration. Lyra paused, her head tilted, the rhythm of the pestle broken. It was the echo of a memory, sharp and sudden. Elara, her silver hair wild, eyes wide with a terrifying, dawning comprehension as the alembic before them had cracked, a shriek of escaping pressure, then the searing white light. Lyra squeezed her eyes shut, pushing the image away. That was 5 years gone. 5 years since Elara had been consumed, and Lyra, barely 16, had fled the burning remains of their sanctuary in the abandoned Phrygian caves, clutching only Elara's journals and the intricately carved obsidian locket that now lay cool against her skin. The locket, Elara had said, held a key, though to what, Lyra was still desperately trying to decipher. She forced her attention back to the mortar, the locket, the journals, and the blight. The creeping sickness that was slowly strangling Derinkuyu, turning fertile earth barren, tainting the deep wells and leaving a trail of listless, fevered bodies in its wake. The city's priests offered prayers, the physicians their useless poultices. But Lyra, seeing the unnatural sheen on the blighted leaves, smelling the faint metallic bitterness in the air even this deep, suspected something far more insidious. Something that felt disturbingly akin to the uncontrolled reaction that had claimed Elara. A muffled shout from the tunnel leading to the surface made her jump. Hurriedly she covered the mortar, doused the nearest lamps, and slipped behind a heavy woven tapestry depicting the constellations as seen from the deepest earth. Her heart hammered against her ribs. It wasn't just the usual city patrols. There was an edge to the voices, a sharpness that spoke of purpose, of a hunt. Search every hovel, every forgotten passage, a voice boomed, closer than she liked. Magistrate Vulcan. His name had become a chill wind through Derinkuyu in recent months. A man of rigid piety and even more rigid ambition, he saw shadows of heresy and dissent in every corner, especially now with the blight fueling public fear. And Lyra, with her reclusive habits and the faint, strange sense that sometimes clung to her when she bartered for supplies in the upper markets, knew she was exactly the kind of shadow he sought. She held her breath, listening as heavy boots tramped nearby. The Viridian Path was a dangerous one, not just for its inherent risks, but for the ignorance of those who would twist its purpose or extinguish its light. Elara had taught her that. Now, it seemed, Magistrate Vulcan was determined to provide a practical demonstration. The sulphur in the air still felt like a warning, but now it was mixed with the undeniable scent of fear. Her own. The sounds of the search party faded, retreating further into the labyrinthine tunnels that honeycombed the earth beneath Derinkuyu. Lyra remained frozen for several long minutes, her senses straining before she dared to move. The immediate danger had passed, but the unease settled deeper, a cold stone in her gut. Vulcan was looking for scapegoats, and she, with her hidden workshop and arcane knowledge, was a perfect candidate. She quickly secured her current experiment, stowing the precious, half-processed resin in a sealed clay pot hidden within a false section of the wall, a trick Elara had taught her. Derinkuyu, this ancient underground city, was a warren of such secrets, layers upon layers of history and hidden ways. Generations had sought refuge here, from Hittite skirmishes to Roman legions, then Arab raiders, and later the iconoclasts. Each had left their mark, their escape routes, their hidden chambers. Lyra's workshop was one such forgotten alcove, carved out centuries ago by folk fleeing some unnamed terror. Now it was her turn to feel like prey. The locket felt heavy against her sternum. She pulled it out, its obsidian surface cool and smooth. The carving was a spiraling serpent, biting its own tail, encircling a cluster of 7 tiny, almost invisible indentations. Elara had said it was a map, or a cipher, related to the Great Harmonizing, the ultimate aim of the Viridian Path, not to turn lead to gold, but to restore balance where it was broken, to mend the ruptures between the elements of the world. A noble goal, but one that seemed impossibly distant as she listened to the fading shouts of Vulcan's men. Her supplies were dwindling. The herbs she bartered for food and coin were becoming harder to find as the blight spread across the plains above. And the critical components for her own research, the research into the blight itself, were even scarcer. She needed moonpetal lichen, which only grew on exposed rock faces under the direct light of the full moon, and powdered cinnabar, carefully sourced to avoid the poisonous impurities that plagued most market samples. The thought of venturing to the surface market, even disguised, made her skin crawl. But hunger, and more pressingly, the dwindling time to understand the blight, gnawed at her. She had seen the pale, listless faces of the children in the lower city levels, the despair in their parents' eyes. The Viridian Path wasn't just an intellectual pursuit. Elara had drilled into her that it came with a profound responsibility. Knowledge without action is a seed left in barren ground, Lyra. Resolutely, she donned her plainest, darkest tunic, tucking her hair fiercely under a drab scarf. She took a small pouch of dried sage and chamomile, common enough remedies, and a few carefully carved wooden charms, things the market folk would accept. Her true work, the potent extracts and carefully balanced compounds, remained hidden. The ascent through the narrow, winding tunnels was always disorienting. The air grew warmer, staler, carrying the scents of cooking fires, unwashed bodies, and the pervasive underlying dust of the ancient city. Derinkuyu was a world unto itself, with its own rhythms, its own unspoken laws. 18 levels deep, some said, though no one Lyra knew had ever seen the lowest. She lived on what was considered a middle level, still deep enough for secrecy, but with access to the older, forgotten ways that led to the surface. As she neared the market level, the sounds grew louder. The haggling of voices, the cry of a goat, the distant clang of a blacksmith's hammer. A sound that, for a moment, transported her back to the blacksmith segment of the provided text, a brief, strange superimposition of another harsh life upon her own. She shook her head, focusing. The blacksmith toiled in soot and fire, his work visible, essential, however unthanked. Her work was in shadow and whisper, its value and its danger, far less understood. The marketplace was a chaotic sprawl in a vast, rock-hewn cavern, lit by sputtering oil lamps and shafts of light from ventilation chimneys that pierced the earth all the way to the surface. Merchants shouted their wares from behind makeshift stalls. She kept her head down, her eyes scanning, not just for the herbs she needed, but for the telltale glint of a soldier's helm, the watchful eyes of Vulcan's informants. Fear was a constant companion, a bitter taste at the back of her throat. She needed to be quick, invisible. She spotted Old Man Hemlock's stall near the grimy entrance to a lesser passage. He was a purveyor of roots and fungi, his face as gnarled as the wares he sold. More importantly, he was discreet and asked few questions, as long as the coin was good or the barter fair. "Sage, girl," he grunted, his one good eye fixing on her. "Or is it the sleeping draught again for the old woman in the deep warrens?" "Chamomile today, Master Hemlock," Lyra said, her voice low, "and perhaps a bit of that dried fire moss if it's fresh." Fire moss, if properly prepared, could create a brief, intense heat, useful for certain distillations. It wasn't overtly suspicious. As Hemlock weighed the herbs, his gaze flickered past her shoulder. "The magistrate's hounds are sniffing louder than usual," he muttered, not looking at her. "They say he seeks a causer of blights, a sorcerer." Lyra's blood ran cold. "Idle talk," she managed, keeping her voice even as she exchanged her wooden charms for the herbs. "Perhaps." Hemlock's eye narrowed. "But idle talk can sharpen axes, girl. Be wary of where you tread." She nodded, a curt gesture of thanks, and melted back into the throng, Hemlock's warning echoing in her mind. The net was tightening. She had to accelerate her research, but how? The fragmented texts Ilara had left were cryptic, filled with symbols and allegories that resisted easy interpretation. One recurring phrase haunted her: "Where the earth bleeds, the sky weeps poison. Seek the twin serpents at the heart of the stone." Twin serpents. The locket. Suddenly a commotion erupted near the main well shaft. Shouts, a woman's scream. Lyra instinctively pressed herself against a shadowed alcove. Vulcan's guards were dragging a young man, barely more than a boy, his face contorted in terror. "He spoke against the magistrate's wisdom," one guard bellowed. "He claimed the Blight was a punishment from forgotten gods." Lyra watched, her stomach churning. This was how Vulcan operated: fear, accusation, the swift removal of any dissenting voice. The boy was likely just a frightened fool, but he would serve as an example. And anyone deemed different, a reclusive woman with unusual knowledge, for instance, would be next. She needed an ally, someone within the city who wasn't cowed by Vulcan, someone who might understand, or at least not immediately condemn. But who? The scholars in the city's failing scriptorium were too timid, the merchants too self-serving. Her thoughts drifted to a name she'd heard whispered in the market: Davut, the stonemason. A man known for his skill in navigating the deepest, oldest parts of Derinkuyu, for his quiet integrity, and for a stubborn refusal to bow to unwarranted authority. He was also, it was rumoured, a widower whose young daughter Elif had recently fallen ill with the Blight. Perhaps desperation could forge an unlikely bridge. It was a risk. Approaching him could expose her, but doing nothing felt like a slower, more certain death, both for her and for any hope of understanding the Blight. Clutching her meagre purchases, Lyra slipped away from the scene at the well, her mind racing. The path ahead was shrouded in more than just the physical darkness of Derinkuyu's depths. It was a path Ilara had walked, a path that demanded not just intellect, but a courage Lyra wasn't sure she possessed. The twin serpents at the heart of the stone. She felt the locket, a solid weight against her fear. The answer had to be there, and she was running out of time to find it. The air in Davut's dwelling, a small, neatly kept chamber carved into the living rock on a quieter, lower level, was thick with the scent of helplessness. Lyra could smell the fever on the child, Elif, even before she saw her. The girl, no more than 7, lay on a low pallet, her small face flushed, her breathing shallow. A damp cloth lay on her forehead, pushed aside by restless movement. Davut, a man whose broad shoulders and calloused hands spoke of a life-shaping stone, now seemed diminished, his face etched with a father's raw grief. He looked up as Lyra entered, his eyes, the colour of the grey Anatolian rock he worked, filled with a weary suspicion. She had found him through a cautious inquiry, claiming to have a balm that might ease a child's fever. "You are the woman Hemlock spoke of?" His voice was rough, like stone grating on stone. "I am Lyra." She kept her voice soft. "I heard your daughter was unwell. I might have something that could help." She offered a small clay pot. It contained a carefully prepared willow bark infusion, a known fever reducer, harmless and common enough. Her true work, the compounds that might address the Blight itself, remained a dangerous secret. Davut eyed the pot, then Lyra. "The physicians have given their draughts, the priests their prayers. She only worsens." There was no accusation in his tone, only a profound exhaustion. Lyra knelt by the child's pallet, her gaze taking in the telltale signs, the faint, almost imperceptible tremor in the girl's limbs, the dry, cracked lips, the subtle, metallic scent that Lyra was beginning to recognize as the Blight's signature. "May I?" she asked, gesturing to the child. Davut hesitated, then gave a curt nod. Lyra gently touched Elif's forehead. The heat was intense. She uncapped the pot and, dipping a clean strip of linen into the infusion, dabbed it carefully on the child's lips, then her wrists. It wouldn't cure, but it might soothe. "What is your price?" Davut asked, his eyes never leaving his daughter. "There is no price for this," Lyra said. "But I am seeking knowledge about the oldest parts of the city, passages that are no longer on any known map. They say you know such ways." Davut's gaze sharpened. "Why would a woman who makes balms need to know such things?" Lyra chose her words carefully. "I am a student of old remedies. Ancient texts speak of certain deep earth minerals are plants that grow only in utter darkness, things that might alleviate suffering. But the texts are obscure, their locations lost. It was a half-truth, carefully constructed. He was silent for a long moment, watching his daughter. Elif's breathing seemed to ease slightly, the restless tossing subsiding. The magistrate, he does not look kindly on those who delve into old remedies these days. I am aware of Magistrate Vulcan's concerns, Lyra said, her voice carefully neutral. My work is quiet. It seeks only to understand, to heal. And if understanding leads to places he deems forbidden, Lyra met his gaze. Some truths are worth the risk, Master Stonemason, especially when lives are at stake. Another long silence. Then Davut sighed, a sound like shifting earth. She is all I have left since her mother passed. He gestured vaguely around the small room. This blight it takes without reason. He looked back at Lyra, a flicker of something, desperation, perhaps a sliver of hope in his eyes. If there is any chance, any at all, what passages do you seek? Lyra felt a knot in her chest loosen slightly. It was a beginning. The texts speak of the serpent's coil and the chamber of echoing waters. Do these names mean anything to you? These were phrases from Alara's journal, linked to the locket's design. Davut frowned, his brow furrowing. Serpent's coil. There is an old name for a series of treacherous winding tunnels deep below the abandoned Phrygian levels, said to spiral down into the earth like a great snake. Few who entered it ever returned. As for echoing waters, many chambers have wells, but one, very deep, is known for the way sound carries. It lies near the coil. Lyra's heart quickened. Could you guide me there? He looked at Elif, then back at Lyra. It is dangerous. Not just the tunnels themselves. Vulcan's men are everywhere. And if you seek what I think you seek, there are old stories. Guardians. Things best left undisturbed. The blight is a thing that should have been left undisturbed, Lyra countered softly. Yet it is here. Perhaps the answers to fighting it are also in places men have feared to tread. Davut ran a hand over his weary face. If you can truly help her, he gestured to Elif, his voice thick with unshed tears. If this balm of yours offers even a night's peaceful sleep, I will consider it. Rest here tonight. We will speak more on the morrow. Lyra nodded, accepting the tentative offer. It was more than she had hoped for. As Davut settled onto a stool, his gaze fixed on his sleeping daughter, Lyra found a quiet corner. The workshop felt a universe away. Here the stakes were starkly, painfully real. The twin serpents. The heart of the stone. The path was leading deeper into the earth, and deeper into danger. But for the first time in a long while, she felt she might not be walking it entirely alone. The following days settled into a strange rhythm. Lyra tended to Elif, her gentle ministrations and carefully prepared infusions, bringing a fragile stability to the child's condition. The fever, though still present, burned less fiercely. Elif even managed small sips of broth, her eyes, when they opened, less clouded with pain. Davut watched, his gruff suspicions slowly eroding, replaced by a hesitant, almost fearful hope. He began to speak more freely of the deep ways, his craftsman's knowledge of Derinkuyu's ancient architecture surfacing. He sketched maps on smoothed pieces of slate, detailing treacherous descents, unstable galleries and ventilation shafts that could serve as secret routes. The Serpent's Coil, he confirmed, was a legendarily perilous section, rumoured to be booby-trapped by its original, long-vanished excavators. The Chamber of Echoing Waters was indeed near its supposed entrance, a vast cistern fed by a deep, pure aquifer, one perhaps untouched by the blight that fouled the upper wells. The old ones, the first diggers, Davut said one evening, his voice low as Elif slept, they weren't just hiding from enemies on the surface. Some say they were containing something. Or protecting something precious within the earth's heart. He tapped the slate map where he'd drawn a tight spiral. The coil leads down, always down. Towards what? No one remembers. Lyra listened, her fingers tracing the obsidian locket. Alara's journals, too, hinted at such things. Not just remedies, but a deeper understanding of the earth's energies, of natural harmonies that, if disturbed, could unleash chaos. The blight, she was increasingly convinced, was such a disturbance. Not a curse from gods or a random sickness, but a consequence. Magistrate Vulcan held another cleansing today, Davut reported grimly a few days later, returning from a brief trip to the upper levels for supplies. burned a collection of old scrolls from the scriptorium, claimed they held pagan heresies. He grows bolder, his pronouncements more absolute. Lyra felt a chill. The destruction of knowledge was anathema to her. He fears what he cannot control, she murmured. He fears anything that challenges his power, Davut corrected. And knowledge, true knowledge, is a challenge. He looked at her directly. If we are to go to the Serpent's Coil, we must go soon. His gaze is turning downwards. He speaks of purifying the city's roots. The unspoken implication hung heavy in the air, purifying the city of people like her. The decision was made. Lyra prepared a small satchel, her most essential tools, a few concentrated extracts, Alara's coded journals, and the locket. Davut packed ropes, extra oil for their lamps, chisels, and a water skin. Elif would be left in the care of a trusted old neighbour, a woman who owed Davut many favours. It was a painful parting for him, but he knew, with a certainty that mirrored Lyra's own, that inaction was the greater danger. Their descent began under the cloak of the deepest night cycle within Derinkuyu, when the city's activity was at its lowest ebb. Davut moved with a quiet confidence through passages Lyra had never known existed, some barely wide enough to squeeze through, others opening into vast, silent caverns where the air was cold and ancient. He navigated by subtle shifts in the rock, by the way the air moved, by a lifetime spent learning the secret grammar of the stone. After what felt like an eternity, they reached a section where the stonework changed, becoming older, cruder, the tunnels narrower and more winding. The air grew heavy, with a faint metallic tang Lyra recognized from her deepest workshop experiments. "We are close to the Phrygian levels," Davut whispered, his lamp held high. "From here, the way to the coil is less certain, more legend than map." They pressed on, the silence broken only by their breathing and the scuff of their boots on the dusty floor. Then Lyra, her senses honed by years of working with subtle energies, felt it. A faint thrumming in the rock, a subtle pressure in the air. It was the same sensation she'd felt near Alara's more potent experiments. "Here," she breathed, stopping before a section of wall that looked no different from any other. But to her it felt thinner. She ran her fingers over the locket, then held it against the stone. The obsidian seemed to absorb the lamplight, growing darker, colder. The 7 tiny indentations on its surface pulsed with an almost imperceptible light, visible only to her trained eye. "The entrance is hidden," she murmured, more to herself than to Davut. Alara wrote of sympathetic resonance. The stone answers to its twin. She pressed the locket harder, concentrating, trying to recall the intricate mental discipline Alara had taught her. Slowly a faint outline appeared on the rock face, a hairline crack tracing the shape of a low, arched doorway. Davut gasped, his lamp wavering. By the first builders. With a concerted effort they pushed. The stone, impossibly heavy, grated inwards, revealing a passage that descended steeply into blackness, a palpable cold wafting out. This was it, the entrance to the Serpent's Coil. The air that met them was not just cold, it was unnaturally still, and carried a scent that made the hairs on Lyra's arms prickle, a scent of deep earth, of minerals she couldn't name, and something else, something that reminded her of ozone and old, forgotten power. "Are you certain of this, Lyra?" Davut's voice was a low rumble, his usual stoicism tinged with an undeniable awe, and perhaps a touch of fear. The passage before them was not merely dark, it seemed to swallow the light from their lamps, the shadows clinging to the edges like grasping hands. Lyra clutched the locket, its faint thrumming a counterpoint to her own racing heart. Alara's notes, the locket, they all point this way. The answers to the Blight, I believe they lie below. She took a deep breath, the strange metallic air filling her lungs. But it will be dangerous. What you said about guardians, traps. The old tales speak of mechanisms that seal passages, of floors that give way, Davut said, his gaze fixed on the yawning darkness. The Phrygians were masters of such things, and those who came before them, even more so. He hefted his satchel. But my Elif, the children of Derinkuyu, they face a danger more certain than any legend. Lead on, Lyra. I will watch our backs and the stone beneath our feet. Their descent into the Serpent's Coil was slow and arduous. The passage twisted and turned, spiralling downwards as its name suggested, the angle often so steep they had to brace themselves against the walls. The air grew colder, the silence more profound, broken only by the drip of unseen water and the rasp of their own breathing. Lyra held her lamp high, her eyes scanning every shadow, every fissure in the rock. Alara's journals had spoken of sigils, of pressure plates, of illusions designed to mislead. Several times, Davut's keen eyes or Lyra's intuition saved them. Once, a section of floor that looked solid gave a hollow sound when Davut tapped it with his chisel. They found a deep pit beneath, cleverly concealed. Another time, Lyra noticed a subtle discoloration in the rock dust, a sign of a metallic tripwire, almost invisible in the dim light. They bypassed it carefully, their nerves stretched taut. The metallic tang in the air intensified, and with it a strange, almost imperceptible vibration that seemed to resonate deep within Lyra's bones. It was disorienting, unsettling. She consulted Ilara's journals frequently, comparing the cryptic symbols to the patterns on the locket and the formations in the tunnel. "The serpent sheds its skin many times before reaching the heart," one passage read. "Each coil holds a test, a shedding of illusion." After what felt like hours, the passage began to level out, opening into a series of small interconnected chambers. Here, the craftsmanship was finer, the walls smoother, almost polished. Strange, indecipherable glyphs were carved into the stone, unlike any Lyra had seen before, older than Phrygian, older even than the Hittite markings found in some upper levels. In the center of one such chamber, a shallow stone basin sat upon a pedestal. It was dry, but the air around it shimmered faintly. Lyra approached cautiously. As she neared, the locket grew warmer against her skin. She held it over the basin. The 7 indentations glowed more brightly now, and a faint melodic hum filled the air, echoing strangely in the confined space. "What is it?" Davut whispered, awestruck. I think it's a focal point," Lyra said, her mind racing. Ilara wrote of nodes of telluric energy, places where the Earth's natural currents converge. She looked at the basin. Perhaps it requires an offering, or an attunement. She tried placing the locket in the basin, but nothing happened. She ran her fingers over the glyphs on the pedestal, trying to match them to the patterns in Ilara's journal. One symbol, a spiral intersected by 3 straight lines, seemed significant. It was repeated on the locket's edge. Concentrating, she visualized the symbol, pouring her intent into it as Ilara had taught her for focusing energies. A faint mist began to rise from the dry basin, coalescing into a shimmering, translucent image. A map, not of tunnels, but of what looked like energy flows, veins of light running through the rock. One bright, pulsating line led deeper downwards. "That way," Lyra breathed, pointing. "That's the path." The map of light faded as they moved on, but its image was seared into Lyra's mind. It led them through another series of passages, these less trapped but more disorienting, the strange vibrations growing stronger. Finally, they emerged into a vast cavern, so large their lamplight barely touched the far walls. The air here was surprisingly fresh, and they could hear the distinct sound of rushing water. "The Chamber of Echoing Waters," Davut said, his voice hushed with reverence. In the center of the cavern, a massive, crystalline formation rose from the floor, pulsing with a soft internal light. Water gushed from its base, clear and pure, into a deep rock-hewn pool. But it wasn't just any water. Lyra could feel an incredible vitality emanating from it, a cleanness that was almost palpable. And then she saw them. Growing around the base of the crystal, in the damp, mineral-rich earth, were clusters of a strange, luminescent fungus. A fungus depicted in one of the most obscure pages of Ilara's journal, labelled simply Core Lumen, the Heart's Light. According to the notes, it possessed incredible purifying properties, capable of neutralizing even the most potent toxins, but only if harvested and prepared under precise, exacting conditions. This was it. This had to be the key to the Blight. But as Lyra moved closer, a low growl echoed from the shadows at the cavern's edge. Davut tensed, raising his chisel like a weapon. 2 pairs of glowing yellow eyes emerged from the darkness, followed by the massive, scaled forms of creatures unlike anything Lyra had ever imagined. Reptilian, certainly, but with an intelligence in their gaze that was ancient and unnerving. Guardians. The old tales were true. The creatures were immense, their scales shimmering like wet obsidian in the faint light radiating from the central crystal. They moved with a sinuous grace that belied their bulk, their powerful, clawed feet making almost no sound on the cavern floor. Their heads, broad and vaguely draconic, swiveled towards Lyra and Davut, those luminous yellow eyes fixed on them with an unnerving intensity. They were not beasts of mindless aggression, Lyra sensed. There was a sentience there, a purpose. Davut stepped slightly in front of Lyra, his chisel held ready, though it seemed a pitiful defence against such beings. "Stay back, Lyra," he murmured, his voice tight. But Lyra held up a hand. "Wait, Davut, I don't think they mean to attack." Not yet. She remembered Alara's teachings. All things have their nature, their purpose. Understand the nature and you understand the path. These creatures were guardians, not wanton destroyers. They were protecting this sacred place. Slowly, deliberately, Lyra lowered her gaze, a gesture of respect, of non-aggression. She unclasped the obsidian locket from her neck and held it out, palm up, so the faint light from the core lumen fungus and the central crystal glinted on its carved surface. "We come in peace," she said, her voice clear and steady, though her heart was a frantic drum against her ribs. "We seek only to heal. Our city, Derinkuyu, suffers from a blight, a poisoning of the land and water. We believe the core lumen holds the key to its restoration." The creatures remained motionless, their yellow eyes unwavering. The larger of the two let out a soft, rumbling hiss like steam escaping from deep within the earth. It was not a sound of aggression, Lyra thought, but of consideration. She focused on the locket, on the Viridian Path's core principle. Balance, harmony. She projected not fear, but her deep understanding of the Blight's unnatural discord, her respect for the sanctity of this place, and her desperate hope for her city. One of the creatures took a slow, deliberate step forward. It was impossibly ancient, its scales scarred and weathered, its eyes holding millennia of silent vigil. It stopped a few paces from her, its massive head lowering slightly as it peered at the locket. The scent of ozone and deep, damp earth intensified. Then, to Lyra's astonishment, the creature let out a series of soft, clicking sounds, and a faint, almost imperceptible pattern of light, similar to the one on the locket, shimmered briefly on its own scaled snout. It was a response, a recognition. The stone answers to its twin. Ilara's words echoed in her mind. The locket wasn't just a key to passages, it was a sigil of lineage, of shared purpose, perhaps even a mark of an ancient pact between the first practitioners of the Viridian Path and these deep earth guardians. Lyra felt a wave of understanding wash over her. Ilara hadn't just been a healer or a scholar, she had been part of something far older, far more profound. And now that legacy rested on Lyra's shoulders. She took a tentative step towards the core lumen fungus, her eyes still on the lead guardian. It watched her, but made no move to stop her. Davut remained frozen, his expression a mixture of terror and disbelief. "The Blight, it is an imbalance," Lyra continued, her voice gaining confidence. "A corruption of the Earth's natural energies. The core lumen, it can restore that balance. But it must be prepared correctly, with respect, with understanding." She reached the edge of the glowing fungi. They pulsed with a gentle light, their strange, otherworldly beauty captivating. She knew from Ilara's journals that only the youngest, most vibrant fronds could be harvested, and only a small amount, lest the colony be weakened. With infinite care, using a small obsidian knife, Ilara had bequeathed her. A tool, she now realized, probably crafted from the same stone as the locket and the Guardian's scales. Lyra began to harvest a few fronds of the core lumen. The lead Guardian watched her every move, its head cocked as if in judgment. The air in the cavern was thick with an almost sacred silence, broken only by the gush of pure water from the crystal. When she had gathered what she needed, a small precious handful that glowed softly in her palm, she stepped back, bowing her head once more to the Guardians. "Thank you," she whispered. "We will use this gift wisely." The lead Guardian let out another soft hiss, then, with a slow, deliberate movement, it turned and melted back into the shadows, its companion following. Their yellow eyes lingered for a moment, then vanished. They were gone. Davut let out a breath he seemed to have been holding for an eternity. What were those things?" "Guardians," Lyra said, her voice still a little shaky, but filled with a newfound awe. "Protectors of this place, and I think ancient allies of those who walked the Viridian Path before me." She looked at the glowing fungus in her hand. "Now, we have what we came for. But the most difficult part is yet to come. We have to get this back to Derinkuyu, and I have to prepare it. and Magistrate Vulcan will not make it easy. The journey back through the Serpent's Coil, though still perilous, felt different. The strange vibrations in the rock seemed less hostile, more like a faint, guiding pulse. Lyra, armed with a core lumen and a deeper understanding of her lineage, moved with a new sense of purpose. Davut, though still shaken by the encounter with the Guardians, was resolute. The sight of the pure water, the vital energy of the deep cavern, had solidified his hope. They emerged from the hidden entrance hours later, exhausted but triumphant, into the familiar, if still dangerous, passages of Lower Derinkuyu. The small pouch containing the core lumen, nestled safely in Lyra's satchel, seemed to glow with a faint, reassuring warmth. It was a beacon of hope in the encroaching darkness. But the darkness above, the darkness of Vulcan's suspicion and the city's fear, was waiting. Current part characters, 4,000. Total characters, 24,000. Their return to Davut's dwelling was met with hushed relief from the old woman caring for Elif. The child was stable, no worse, but no better. The true test was about to begin. Lyra knew the preparation of the core lumen was critical. Elara's journals were filled with warnings about incorrect sequencing or impatient distillation, which could render the fungus inert, or worse, unpredictably volatile. "You need a safe place, Lyra," Davut said, his brow furrowed with worry as he watched her lay out her specialized tools, miniature glass vials, a small, precisely calibrated burner, filters made from tightly woven deep moss. "My home is too exposed. Vulcan's men are becoming more brazen in their searches." "My old workshop," Lyra decided, "the one beneath the collapsed cistern. It's well hidden, and the stone there, it's sympathetic to the energies I need to work with." She had abandoned it after the first intensified searches, but it was her best option. "But I'll need your help, Davut, to move these supplies and to keep watch. The process will take at least 2 full dark cycles, and I cannot be disturbed." Davut nodded, his jaw set. "I owe you that, and more. For Elif, for Derinkuyu." Under the cover of the city's deepest slumber, they moved Lyra's essential equipment to the forgotten workshop. It was damp, cold, and smelled of ancient dust, but it was secure. Davut, using his stonemason's skills, helped her reinforce a loose section of the tunnel wall, creating a secondary, almost invisible barrier. He then took up a position further up the passage, a silent, grim sentinel. Lyra began the delicate process. The core lumen, she knew, had to be gently bruised, never cut with common metal, then steeped in a solution of 3-fold filtered dew water and a tincture of silver willow sap. The temperature had to be raised by fractions of a degree over many hours, held steady, then slowly cooled. Each step was a meditation, a dance of precision and intuition. Elara's voice seemed to whisper in her ear, guiding her hands, reminding her of the subtle signs, the change in color, the release of a particular scent, the way the liquid clung to the glass. Hours bled into each other. Lyra lost track of time, her world shrinking to the glow of her small lamp, the bubbling retort, the precious, transforming fungus. She was tired, her muscles aching, her eyes burning, but a fierce energy sustained her. This was the culmination of everything Elara had taught her, everything she had fought to preserve. Outside, Davut kept his vigil. Twice he heard the distant sounds of patrols, their voices echoing faintly in the warren of tunnels. He remained still as the stone around him, his heart a cold knot of anxiety. He thought of Elif, her small, fevered face, and his resolve hardened. Lyra was their only hope. On the second dark cycle, as Lyra performed the final critical distillation, a new sound reached Davut, closer this time. Boots, not just a patrol, but several men, moving with purpose, and a voice he recognized with a sickening lurch, Magistrate Vulcan. The informant was certain, Vulcan's voice, cold and sharp, cut through the silence. She was seen procuring unusual minerals. Her kind always seek the dark places, like vermin. Search every offshoot of this passage. Davut's blood ran cold. He had to warn Lyra, but how? Any sound would betray his position and hers. He gripped his heaviest chisel, his knuckles white. Inside the workshop, Lyra was oblivious, her concentration absolute. The final distillate of the core lumen was beginning to form, a single pearlescent drop condensing in the collection vial. It glowed with a soft, pure light, more intense than the raw fungus itself. It was beautiful, perfect. Then she heard it, a faint scrape from beyond her makeshift barrier. Her head snapped up, heart leaping into her throat. She looked at the single precious drop. It wasn't enough for the whole city, not yet. But it might be enough for a demonstration, or a defense. The scraping came again, louder. Then Davut's voice, strained but clear. "Magistrate, there is nothing here but old rockfalls. You waste your time." A harsh laugh. "Stonemason, always protecting the old ways, aren't you? Perhaps you protect more than just stones." Then Vulcan's chilling command, "Break it down. If there is a rat's nest in there, we will smoke it out." Lyra's mind raced. The experiment that killed Alara, it had involved an uncontrolled release of energy when a stabilizing agent was added too quickly to a highly concentrated essence. She looked at the glowing drop, then at a small vial of powdered sunstone, a powerful catalyst, but dangerously reactive if not balanced. Heavy blows rained against the reinforced wall. Dust sifted from the ceiling. Lyra made her decision. She couldn't fight them, not with force, but perhaps she could show them, or blind them. With a steady hand, she carefully drew the single drop of core lumen essence into a fine glass pipette. She then uncorked the sunstone powder. This was incredibly risky. Alara's warning screamed in her memory. The wall groaned, a large crack appearing. Vulcan's triumphant voice, "Almost there." Lyra took a deep breath. She held the pipette over the sunstone. "Balance, Lyra. Always balance." She released not the whole drop, but a mere fraction, the tiniest conceivable speck, onto the powder. The reaction was instantaneous. Not an explosion as she had half feared from Alara's disastrous experiment, but an incandescent flash of pure white light, so brilliant it seemed to burn through Lyra's eyelids even though they were squeezed shut. It was accompanied by a high-pitched singing hum that resonated deep within the stone, a sound that felt both ancient and utterly alien. The air in the workshop crackled with static energy. When Lyra dared to open her eyes a fraction, the tiny workshop was filled with an ethereal, pulsing radiance, emanating from the spot where the core luminescence had met the sunstone. The light wasn't hot, but it was overwhelmingly intense, making the shadows dance like frantic ghosts. Beyond the crumbling barrier, she heard cries of alarm, shouts of pain and confusion. "My eyes! Gods, my eyes! What sorcery is this?" Then Vulcan's voice, tight with fury and a new note of fear. Fall back, you fools!" The heavy blows stopped. There was a scramble of retreating footsteps, curses and whimpers. Lyra quickly stoppered the vial containing the remaining core luminescence, her hands trembling slightly. The intense light in the workshop began to subside, fading back to the soft glow of her single lamp. The singing hum dwindled, leaving a ringing silence. She listened, her heart pounding. Silence. They were gone. Carefully, she pushed aside the now badly damaged section of wall. Davut was slumped against the tunnel side, blinking, his face pale but unharmed. He looked at her, his eyes wide with disbelief. "Lyra, what in the name of the deep earth was that?" "A controlled release." She panted, still a little dazed herself. "The core lumen, it reacts strongly to certain catalysts. I hoped it would be enough to dissuade them." She had gambled, using a fraction of the precious essence, hoping for a light bright enough to blind and terrify, but not destructive enough to bring the tunnel down on them. Alara's final, fatal experiment had involved a much larger quantity and a less stable catalyst. Lyra had learned from that tragedy, even in her fear. Davut slowly got to his feet, shaking his head. Dissuade? Lyra, they fled like demons were at their heels. Some were screaming about being struck blind. He peered down the tunnel. "I don't think they'll be back soon." He looked at her with a new, profound respect. "You saved us." "For now," Lyra said, gathering her precious vials. "But this changes things. Vulcan will be enraged. He won't just call it heresy now, he'll call it an attack. We need to act quickly with the antidote." They returned to Davut's dwelling, the remaining core lumen essence carefully shielded. Elif was still sleeping, her breathing a little easier. Lyra knew she couldn't produce enough antidote for the entire city with what remained, not quickly. But she could make enough for Elif, and perhaps for a few others. And if it worked, if people saw. "We need to show them," Davut said, his voice firm, echoing her thoughts. "Not Vulcan, not his priests, but the ordinary folk, the ones who are suffering. If they see your craft can heal, perhaps they will listen to reason, not to fear." Lyra nodded. It was another gamble. Publicly demonstrating her abilities would draw Vulcan's full wrath, but hiding was no longer a viable option. The light, however brief, had exposed her. Over the next few hours, Lyra worked with unwavering focus, preparing a small batch of the antidote. She administered a carefully measured dose to Elif. Then, with Davut by her side, they sought out a few other families in the lower levels whose children were severely afflicted by the Blight. The fear and suspicion in their eyes was palpable, but Davut's quiet reassurances and the desperate hope for their children made them agree. They waited. The hours stretched, filled with a tense anticipation. Lyra felt utterly exposed, her fate hanging by a thread. Then it began. Elif was the first. She stirred, her eyelids fluttering. She coughed, a weak sound, then her eyes opened, and for the first time in weeks there was a clarity in her gaze, a spark of her old self. She looked at Davut and smiled, a tiny, fragile smile that was more precious than any gold. "Papa?" she whispered, her voice reedy. Davut choked back a sob, gathering his daughter into his arms. Tears streamed down his weathered face. Similar scenes unfolded in the other dwellings. Fevers broke, colour returned to pale cheeks. The listless apathy of the Blight began to recede. Word spread like wildfire through the lower levels of Derinkuyu, whispers of the Lightweaver, the Stone Sage, a woman with a hidden knowledge who could turn back the sickness. Hope, a fragile but tenacious seed, began to sprout in the oppressive darkness. But Lyra knew that hope, in Vulcan's eyes, would be the most dangerous heresy of all. The true confrontation was yet to come, and it would not be fought with blinding light, but with the hearts and minds of Derinkuyu's people. The fate of the city and her own now rested on which would prove stronger, the fear Vulcan peddled, or the healing she offered. News of the miraculous recoveries reached Magistrate Vulcan swiftly. His informants, embedded even in the poorest warrens of Derinkuyu, painted a picture not of divine intervention, but of dangerous sorcery, of a woman usurping the authority of both the priests and the physicians, bewitching the populace with her unnatural arts. The incident with the blinding light in the tunnels was now cast as a direct assault on his rightful authority, an act of open rebellion. Vulcan, his ambition matched only by his rigid conviction in his own righteousness, saw Lyra not merely as a heretic, but as a fundamental threat to the order he sought to impose on Derinkuyu. An order that, conveniently, consolidated his own power. He summoned the city's criers, his voice ringing with manufactured outrage. "This woman, Lyra, who calls herself a healer, is a viper in our midst," his proclamations echoed through the main thoroughfares and caverns. "She consorts with dark powers. Her remedies are illusions designed to lead you astray. She struck down my loyal guards with blinding magic. She is the source of the Blight, seeking to weaken us, to turn us from the true path. Surrender her, and Derinkuyu will be cleansed. Harbour her, and you share in her corruption." Fear, expertly stoked, rippled through the city. Those who had not witnessed the healings firsthand, those already swayed by Vulcan's stern pronouncements and the priest's dire warnings, began to look upon their neighbours with suspicion. Doors were bolted earlier. Whispers turned fearful. Lyra, sheltered in Davut's dwelling, felt the shift. The initial wave of gratitude from the families she'd helped was now tinged with anxiety. They were grateful, yes, but also terrified of being associated with her, of incurring Vulcan's wrath. "He twists the truth like a serpent," Davut said, his face grim as he returned from a scouting trip to the upper levels. "He's offering a substantial reward for your capture. People are scared, Lyra. Even those who saw what you did for their children. Fear is a powerful poison." "More powerful than the Blight sometimes," Lyra murmured, looking at Elif, who was now sitting up, albeit weakly, and sipping broth. The child's recovery was undeniable, a beacon. But how many such beacons would it take to overcome a tide of fear? "We cannot hide here forever," Lyra said. "He will tear this city apart stone by stone to find me. And if he does, the knowledge of the core lumen, the Viridian path, it will be lost, or worse, perverted." She thought of Alara's sacrifice. She couldn't let it be in vain. "What can we do?" Davut asked, his hope visibly faltering. "We are one woman and one stonemason against the magistrate and all his guards, against the fear he wields like a club." Lyra looked at the obsidian locket, turning it over in her fingers. The twin serpents, the heart of the stone. Alara's journal spoke not just of compounds and distillations, but of resonance, of influencing not just matter, but perception, if the balance was right. A desperate idea, born of her conversation with the Guardians, began to form. The Guardians had responded to the locket, to her intent. What if? What if the people of Derinkuyu could too? The Chamber of Echoing Waters, Lyra said slowly. You said sound carries there, Davut, that it's near the heart of the city's oldest levels, connected to many passages. Davut nodded. Aye, the acoustics are remarkable. A whisper can sound like a shout. Vulcan uses the criers, the public spaces, to spread his fear, Lyra mused. What if there was another voice? A voice that spoke not of fear, but of truth? A voice that resonated from the very heart of Derinkuyu, from its ancient stones? You mean to speak to the city from there? Davut looked incredulous. They would never let you reach it, and even if you did, who would listen against Vulcan's commands? Perhaps they would listen if the voice wasn't just mine, Lyra said, her gaze distant. She thought of the central crystal in the Guardian's cavern, the way it pulsed with energy, the way it seemed connected to the very rock of Cappadocia. Alara's notes had described using certain crystals to amplify and project, not just sound, but intent, emotional resonance. It was esoteric, uncertain, but it was all she had left. There is a smaller crystal formation near the entrance to the Echoing Waters, if I remember the old maps correctly, Davut said slowly, beginning to grasp her audacious plan. Not as large as the one in the Guardian's lair, but similar in structure. It might be enough, Lyra said, if I can attune it, if I can project not just my words, but the truth of what the core lumen can do, the hope it represents. She looked at Davut. It's a fragile chance, but Vulcan is driving this city towards a precipice. If we don't offer them a different path, they will follow him into the abyss. The plan was desperate, fraught with peril. Reaching the Chamber of Echoing Waters would mean navigating tunnels that were likely now heavily patrolled. Setting up her makeshift amplifier would take time she didn't have, and even if she succeeded, there was no guarantee anyone would heed her. But as she looked at Elif's recovering form, at the quiet strength in Davut's weary eyes, she knew she had to try. The Viridian path was not just about healing physical blights. It was about mending the ruptures in understanding, in trust, and Derinkuyu was deeply ruptured. Help me gather what I need, Davut, Lyra said, a new resolve hardening her voice. We'll show this city that the true poison isn't hidden knowledge, but cultivated fear. Their journey to the Chamber of Echoing Waters was a nightmare of stealth and near misses. Vulcan, enraged by Lyra's continued evasion and the whispers of her healing, had indeed ordered his guards to seal off and patrol the deeper, less-used passages. Davut's intimate knowledge of Derinkuyu's secret ways was tested to its limits. They squeezed through forgotten priest holes, navigated collapsed sections by touch, and once had to submerge themselves in a near-freezing cistern overflow to avoid a heavily armed patrol. Lyra carried her precious satchel, shielding the remaining core luminescence and a small, carefully selected focusing crystal from her collection. Each step was a risk, each shadow a potential threat. But the image of Elif's smile, the memory of the Guardian's ancient wisdom, fueled her. Finally, bruised, soaked, and exhausted, they reached the antechamber to the Chamber of Echoing Waters. As Davut had said, a smaller but still significant crystalline formation pulsed with a faint light in its center. The air here hummed with a subtle energy, the acoustics already amplifying their hushed whispers. "This is it," Davut breathed, leaning against the cool stone, his chest heaving. "Now what, Lyra?" Lyra approached the crystal. It was cold to the touch, but thrummed with a life of its own. She placed her own focusing crystal near its base, then carefully arranged a series of small polished obsidian shards, a gift from the Guardian's cavern floor, in a pattern Alara's journal had called the Serpent's Embrace, designed to channel and amplify subtle energies. This wasn't about volume, she knew. It was about resonance, about making her voice, her intent, part of the very stone of Derinkuyu. As she worked, Davut kept watch, his eyes scanning the tunnel entrance. "They're searching the levels above us systematically," he reported quietly. "It won't be long before they think to look this deep again, especially if Vulcan connects this chamber to the old legends." Lyra nodded, her focus unwavering. She took out the obsidian locket, placing it directly onto the central crystal. Then she closed her eyes, her hands resting lightly on the cool, vibrating stone. She didn't think of words, not yet. She thought of Elif's recovery, of the pure water in the Guardian's lair, of the gentle light of the core lumen. She poured all her hope, all her conviction in the Viridian path, all her fierce desire for Derinkuyu's healing into the crystal, into the locket, into the ancient stones around them. A soft hum began to emanate from the crystal, growing slowly in intensity, the obsidian shards around it vibrating in sympathy. The faint light within the crystal brightened, pulsing in rhythm with Lyra's own heartbeat. She could feel it, a connection being forged, a circuit of energy flowing from her through the crystals and into the very fabric of Derinkuyu. "It's working," she whispered, a sense of awe filling her. Then she took a deep breath and began to speak, not loudly but clearly, her voice imbued with the focused energy of her intent. "People of Derinkuyu." Her voice, amplified and carried by the chamber's unique acoustics and the resonating crystal, seemed to flow outwards, not as a shout, but as a pervasive, inescapable whisper, seeping through the stone, echoing in distant passages, reaching into the deepest dwellings and the most crowded caverns. "You are told to fear. You are told that knowledge is a blight, that healing outside of sanctioned ways is heresy. But I ask you to look at your children, at your neighbors who have suffered. Ask yourselves, what has fear brought you? What has blind obedience healed?" In the levels above, people stopped. They looked around, confused, searching for the source of the strange, resonant voice that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The blight that sickens our city is not a curse from the gods, nor the work of some imagined sorcery. It is an imbalance, a poison in our earth and water. I have seen its source, and I have found a remedy, the core lumen, the heart's light, a gift from the deepest, purest parts of our world. Vulcan, in his chambers, heard the voice. His face contorted in fury. "Find her! Silence that echo!" he roared at his guards. But the voice continued, calm, resonant, carrying not just words, but the undeniable feeling of Lyra's conviction. "I offer not illusions, but healing. I offer not fear, but understanding. The path to Derinkuyu's recovery lies not in burning scrolls or persecuting healers, but in seeking truth, in respecting the delicate balance of the world we inhabit. This knowledge, the Viridian path, is not a weapon nor a tool for power. It is a responsibility, a promise to mend what is broken." She spoke of Elif's recovery, naming other children who were now free from the Blight's worst ravages. She described the purity of the deep waters, the life-giving energy she had witnessed. She didn't attack Vulcan directly, but the contrast between her message of healing and his message of fear was stark. "Choose, Derinkuyu," her voice resonated. "Choose knowledge over ignorance. Choose healing over fear. The heart of this ancient city still beats with life. Do not let it be silenced by those who seek to control you through darkness." As her last words faded, a profound silence fell over Derinkuyu, a silence far deeper than the usual hush of the underground city. It was a silence of consideration, of dawning awareness. Lyra sagged against the crystal, drained but strangely peaceful. She had done all she could, the rest was up to the people. Davut gripped her arm. "Lyra, you were magnificent." His voice was filled with awe. "They heard you. I know they did." But then, from the tunnel came the sound they had dreaded, the heavy tramp of boots, the clatter of weapons. Vulcan's guards no longer searching blindly, but heading directly towards them, drawn by the undeniable source of the citywide address. "They're coming," Davut said grimly, pulling Lyra away from the resonating crystal. "And they won't be gentle this time." Lyra nodded, her brief moment of peace shattered. She quickly gathered the locket and her small satchel. The focusing crystal and obsidian shards she left, their purpose was served. "We need to move. Is there another way out of these deeper chambers, one they might not anticipate?" Davut frowned in concentration, his mind racing through the ancient layouts. "There's one, a ventilation shaft, very old, rarely used. It ascends steeply to a Phrygian-era grain silo, long abandoned near the western edge of the upper city. It will be a hard climb, narrow, but they'll expect us to use the main access tunnels." "Lead the way," Lyra said, her resolve firm. She had delivered her message. Now survival was paramount, if only to continue her work. The guards burst into the chamber of echoing waters just as Lyra and Davut slipped into a narrow fissure hidden behind a fall of rock. They could hear Vulcan's enraged shouts echoing behind them, magnified by the chamber's acoustics. "She was here! Find her! Seal every exit from these cursed depths." The ventilation shaft was even more difficult than Davut had described. It was a claustrophobic chimney of rough-hewn stone, ascending almost vertically. They climbed by feel as much as by sight, their lamps casting eerie, dancing shadows. Loose stones cascaded below them with every dislodged handhold. Lyra's muscles screamed in protest. Her lungs burned, but the thought of Vulcan's men spurred her on. Davut, despite his bulk, moved with a surprising agility, testing each hold before trusting his weight to it. After what felt like an eternity of scraping, climbing, and breathless exertion, they saw a faint glimmer of light above. Not lamplight, but the pale, diffuse light of the upper world filtering through cracks in ancient capstones. "The silo," Davut panted, relief evident in his voice. "We're almost there." With a final, agonizing effort, they pulled themselves up and out of the shaft, emerging into a vast circular stone structure, its roof long gone, open to the Cappadocian sky. It was late afternoon on the surface. The sun, already beginning its descent, cast long shadows across the wind-swept plains. The air, though thin and carrying the familiar dust of Anatolia, felt intoxicatingly fresh after the confines of Derinkuyu. Lyra stood for a moment, blinking against the unaccustomed brightness, drinking in the open space. But there was no time to linger. They could hear the distant sounds of the city, a city now in turmoil, caught between Vulcan's fear and the seed of hope she had planted. "We need to get away from Derinkuyu," Davut said, scanning the desolate landscape. "Vulcan will have patrols across the plains. He won't give up." "I know a place," Lyra said, thinking of the remote, hidden valley where Alara had first established her sanctuary, the place that had burned. "It's a hard journey, and the sanctuary itself is gone. But the caves, some might still be defensible. And the land there, it was always purer." It was also where Alara had cultivated certain rare plants essential for the Viridian path, plants that might not exist anywhere else. As they cautiously made their way from the silo, keeping to the shelter of rocky outcrops and ancient crumbling walls, they saw dust plumes in the distance, riders fanning out from Derinkuyu. Vulcan was indeed casting his net wide. Their journey was arduous. They travelled by night, hiding by day, their knowledge of the land and its secret ways their only protection. Food was scarce, water precious. Lyra shared the last of the Corlumen antidote with Davut when he developed a hacking cough from the chill night air and exhaustion. She couldn't risk him falling truly ill. During one of their hidden daytime rests, in a shepherd's abandoned rock shelter, Davut looked at Lyra. His face etched with weariness, but also a new understanding. "What you did back there, Lyra, with your voice, with the crystal, it wasn't just words. People felt it. I felt it. Even if Vulcan silences them for now, that seed, it's planted." Lyra nodded, a faint, tired smile touching her lips. "The Viridian path teaches that true change begins with resonance, a shared understanding. Whether it's enough, I don't know." "And those creatures?" Davut asked, the awe still in his voice. "The Guardians." "They are part of it," Lyra said, "part of an older balance. Alara believed that our world is woven from such energies, such hidden alliances. When we forget them, when we exploit and unbalance, the blight is what follows." She touched the obsidian locket. "This isn't just a key, Davut. It's a reminder, a responsibility." Days later, half-starved and exhausted, they reached the hidden valley. It was as desolate as Lyra remembered, the blackened scars of the fire that had taken Alara still visible on the cliff face. But as she had hoped, some of the deeper caves were intact. And miraculously, in a sheltered, spring-fed hollow that the fire hadn't reached, a patch of Alara's rarest herbs still grew, struggling but alive. Among them, Lyra recognized the delicate, silver-leafed moonflower, essential for stabilizing the most potent Corlumen distillations. Here they could rest. Here Lyra could begin again, not just to brew remedies, but to piece together the deeper, more profound aspects of Alara's research, the great harmonizing. Word from Derinkuyu, when it eventually reached them via a sympathetic travelling merchant weeks later, was mixed. Vulcan had tightened his grip, his rule more oppressive than ever. Several people accused of harbouring Lyra or speaking in her favour had been imprisoned. The official narrative was that Lyra was a dangerous sorceress who had fled justice. But the merchant also spoke of other things, of secret gatherings in the deep levels where people whispered of the Light Weaver's message. of a newfound caution among many families regarding the city's water, a quiet insistence on seeking out older, less accessible wells, of small anonymous offerings of pure water and herbs being left for the sick. The blight had not vanished, but its relentless spread seemed to have slowed in certain areas, a result of Lyra's intervention and the subtle shifts in behaviour her message had inspired. The seed of hope, it seemed, was indeed growing, however slowly, however secretly, in the deep stony heart of Derinkuyu. Lyra looked out at the Cappadocian landscape, the wind whipping her hair. Her path was still uncertain, still fraught with danger. Vulcan's reach was long. But she was not just a fugitive. She was a keeper of ancient knowledge, a practitioner of the Viridian path. And she was no longer entirely alone. Davut, his strength returning, was already working to fortify their new humble sanctuary, his stonemason skills finding new purpose. Elif, he had learned through a carefully relayed message, was fully recovered, a living testament to Lyra's craft. The obsidian locket felt warm in her hand, the twin serpents, the heart of the stone. The journey was far from over. But here, in this remote valley, with the ancient earth beneath her feet and the vast Anatolian sky above, Lyra felt a quiet stirring of purpose. The Viridian path was long, its true destination perhaps unknowable, but she would walk it, for Alara, for Derinkuyu, for the delicate, often forgotten balance of the world. The fire of her hidden forge, though now burning in a different, wilder place, would not be extinguished. Life in the hidden valley settled into a new rhythm, one dictated by the seasons, the availability of resources, and the ever-present need for caution. Lyra dedicated herself to Alara's journals, painstakingly transcribing the coded passages, her understanding of the Viridian path deepening with each deciphered symbol. The valley, though scarred, proved to be a haven of biodiversity. She discovered plants Alara had only theorized about, minerals with unique resonant properties and subtle telluric currents that hummed beneath the earth, ripe for study. Davut, his initial grief for his old life in Derinkuyu, slowly giving way to a pragmatic acceptance, became her steadfast protector and collaborator. His knowledge of stone helped them create a secure, defensible series of chambers within the caves. He carved channels to bring fresh spring water directly into their main living area and helped Lyra construct a small, efficient kiln for her crucibles, using techniques passed down through generations of Cappadocian builders. He was no scholar of the Viridian path, but he possessed an intuitive understanding of the earth's ways, a craftsman's respect for natural materials that resonated deeply with Lyra's own philosophy. He became the hands that shaped the physical world around her, allowing her mind to delve into the more esoteric aspects of her craft. They were not entirely cut off. The travelling merchant, an old acquaintance of Davut's named Yusuf, became their tenuous link to the outside world. Once every few months he would make the perilous journey, bringing news, essential supplies they couldn't produce themselves, salt, a little grain, occasional metal tools, and carrying carefully worded anonymous messages back to a small network of sympathizers Davut had cultivated within Derinkuyu, families whose children Lyra had healed, individuals weary of Vulcan's oppressive rule. From Yusuf they learned that Vulcan's grip on Derinkuyu remained iron-fisted. The official story of Lyra, the Blight Witch, was reinforced with regular pronouncements and staged discoveries of her supposed evil workings. Yet Yusuf also spoke of an undercurrent of quiet resistance. He told of small secret gardens appearing in hidden niches of the city, where people were attempting to cultivate the few purifying herbs Lyra had taught them about. He spoke of a new skepticism towards official remedies, and a growing, albeit fearful, respect for the old ways of healing. The core lumen antidote, though Lyra had only been able to produce a small amount, had become a legend, its efficacy undeniable. One day Yusuf brought graver news. "The blight has shifted," he said, his face troubled. "It's no longer just the water or the crops. A new sickness has appeared among the stonecutters in the deep quarries, a lung affliction. They cough incessantly, a dry, rasping sound, and their strength fades. Vulcan blames it on impure thoughts and has ordered more prayer." Lyra listened, a cold dread seeping into her. A lung affliction tied to the quarries. Alara's journals had spoken of certain deep earth minerals that, when disturbed and inhaled as fine dust, could cause such symptoms. It wasn't a magical blight, it was a poisoning, likely exacerbated by Vulcan's demands for increased stone extraction for his grandiose building projects, his monuments to order. Can you find out which quarries are most affected? Lyra asked Yusuf, and if possible, bring me samples of the dust, the rock they are cutting. Davut, who had spent his life in quarries, grew sombre. I know those dusts, Lyra. Some are benign. Others the old masters warned against, said they held sleeping fire that could consume a man's breath. When Yusuf returned months later, he brought the requested samples, small pouches of fine greyish dust. Lyra analysed them meticulously. Her suspicions were confirmed. One of the primary quarries Vulcan had ordered reopened, against older traditions, was rich in a mineral that, when pulverised, released microscopic, needle-like shards. It was these shards, not any curse, that were tearing at the quarryman's lungs. There is a way to neutralise this, Lyra said, after days spent poring over Alara's texts and conducting careful experiments. A resin from the deep-rooted ironwood tree combined with powdered moonstone. When burned, the smoke can bind to the dust particles, rendering them less volatile, less harmful if inhaled, and a poultice of crushed comfrey root and cave moss can soothe the inflamed lungs. It wasn't a perfect cure for those already badly afflicted, but it could prevent further harm and ease the suffering. The challenge was delivering this knowledge and the materials to Derinkuyu. Yusuf was willing, but the risk was immense. I will go, Davut said, his voice quiet but firm. I know the quarries, I know the men. They will trust me even if they fear Vulcan, and I can teach them how to prepare the resin, how to recognize the safe veins of stone. He looked at Lyra. You have given me back my daughter, Lyra. You have shown me there is more to this world than stone and sorrow. Let me do this. Lyra was torn. Sending Davut back into Vulcan's grasp was a terrible risk. But the image of the suffering quarryman, the memory of Derinkuyu's people, weighed heavily on her. This was the Viridian path in action, not just understanding, but intervening, healing. She prepared a concentrated version of the ironwood resin, enough to treat a small area, and carefully instructed Davut on its application and the preparation of the poultice. She also gave him a small, disguised pouch of the core luminescence, what little she had left after ensuring her own small supply for research. For Elif, she said, a final insurance, and perhaps, if the moment is right, for others. Davut's departure left a void in the small valley sanctuary. Lyra immersed herself in her work, but a part of her mind was always listening, waiting, fearing the news Yusuf might bring on his next visit. Weeks turned into months. The valley bloomed with the brief, fierce beauty of an Anatolian spring, then baked under the summer sun. Lyra's small garden of medicinal herbs thrived under her care. She made progress deciphering the most obscure sections of Alara's journals, particularly those concerning the Great Harmonizing, a concept that seemed less about specific remedies and more about understanding and influencing the subtle energetic flows of the natural world, a kind of ecological alchemy. She even began to cautiously experiment with the resonant properties of the local crystals, attempting to replicate on a small scale the amplification she had achieved in the Chamber of Echoing Waters. Then Yusuf arrived, his face a mixture of relief and grimness. Davut is alive, he said immediately, and Lyra felt a wave of dizziness, the release of a tension she hadn't fully acknowledged. He is a hero in the deep levels, though no one dares say it aloud. Yusuf recounted how Davut, using his old connections and moving like a ghost through the lower city, had reached the afflicted quarrymen. He had shown them the danger of the specific mineral dust, taught them how to prepare and use the ironwood resin smoke, and how to make the soothing poultices. He had even, Yusuf said with a grin, subtly sabotaged some of Vulcan's most reckless quarrying operations, causing minor, inexplicable rock falls in the most dangerous veins of stone. The lung sickness has not vanished, Yusuf continued, but it is much lessened among those who heeded Davut's warnings. He shared the core luminescence you gave him with the worst afflicted, and some have made remarkable recoveries. They call him Davut the Whisperer, for the way he came and went, and for the quiet truths he spoke. But the news was not all good. Vulcan knows something is amiss, Yusuf said, his voice dropping. He knows the sickness has abated in ways his priests cannot explain. His paranoia has grown. He has arrested several more people, anyone suspected of old knowledge or dissent. He is convinced there is a hidden network, a conspiracy against him, led by you, Lyra. He speaks of a final purification of Derinkuyu. A final purification. The words sent a chill down Lyra's spine. Vulcan was becoming unhinged, his grip on power threatened by the very people he claimed to protect. Davut had to flee Derinkuyu, Yusuf concluded. He sent word through a trusted contact. He is making his way here, to the valley, but he said it would be slow. He is being hunted. Lyra's relief at Davut's survival was now mixed with a fresh wave of anxiety. The valley, their sanctuary, might not remain hidden forever if Davut was being actively pursued. And then Yusuf delivered the most startling piece of information. There is a new development. A scholar, a woman named Iona, arrived in Derinkuyu some weeks ago. She came from the west, from one of the great coastal cities, claiming to be studying ancient Anatolian architecture. But she asks too many questions about unusual phenomena, about folk healers, about Magistrate Vulcan's more extreme pronouncements. Some say she even tried to access the restricted sections of the scriptorium. Vulcan has her under watch, but she is careful, and she carries letters of introduction from powerful people in the west, which gives Vulcan pause. Iona, a scholar from the west. Lyra felt a flicker of intrigue. Could this be someone who might understand? Or was she another agent of some unseen power, another threat? The waiting for Davut was agonizing. Lyra reinforced the valley's natural defenses, setting subtle warning markers on the paths, preparing emergency caches of supplies. She continued her research, but her focus was fractured, her ears constantly straining for any unfamiliar sound. One evening, as a sliver of moon hung in the darkening sky, a low whistle echoed from the rocks above the valley entrance, a signal Davut, and she had agreed upon. He was back. He emerged from the shadows, thinner, warier, but his eyes held a spark of triumph. He was not alone. With him was a woman, tall and self-possessed, her clothing practical, but of a finer cut than anything seen in Derinkuyu. Her intelligent, observant eyes met Lyra's with a frank curiosity. "Lyra," Davut said, a tired smile on his face. "This is Iona. She sought me out in Derinkuyu. She believes your work and Elara's might be connected to a broader, ancient tradition of knowledge, one that has been systematically suppressed across many lands." Iona stepped forward, extending a hand not in the manner of a supplicant, but of an equal. "Lyra of Derinkuyu," she said, her voice clear and accented. "I have heard tales of your skill. I believe we may have much to discuss. My own research into the silent libraries, collections of knowledge hidden or destroyed by rising orthodoxies, has led me to believe that what you call the Viridian Path is but one branch of a vast, ancient tree of wisdom concerning the true workings of the world, a wisdom now in grave danger. My own research into the silent libraries, collections of knowledge hidden or destroyed by rising orthodoxies, has led me to believe that what you call the Viridian Path is but one branch of a vast, ancient tree of..." Lyra looked from Davut to Iona, a whirlwind of emotions coursing through her. The arrival of this stranger, this scholar from afar, felt like a pivotal moment. Was this a new ally, a new hope for the preservation and understanding of Elara's legacy, or was it the beginning of a new, more complex set of dangers? The valley, once a refuge, suddenly felt much smaller, and the world outside, with its encroaching shadows and faint glimmers of forgotten light, much larger. The Viridian Path, it seemed, was about to lead her onto an even more unexpected trail. Over the following days, as Davut rested and recounted his harrowing experiences in Derinkuyu, Iona and Lyra engaged in intense discussions. Iona possessed a breadth of historical and philosophical knowledge that amazed Lyra. She spoke of Alexandrian mystics, of Celtic druids, of Persian elementalists, all echoing themes Lyra recognized from Elara's most cryptic writings. The interconnectedness of all things, the subtle energies that shape the world, the responsibility of those who possessed such understanding. "What your master called the Viridian Path," Iona explained, her eyes alight with scholarly passion, "shares remarkable similarities with what scholars in my homeland refer to as Geosophia, earth wisdom. It posits that the earth itself is a living entity, with its own circulatory systems, its own breath. Blights, plagues, even some forms of societal unrest are seen as symptoms of a deeper imbalance, a disharmony between humanity and the planet's vital forces. She had been tracing rumors of surviving practitioners, of hidden texts for years. The stories filtering out of Derinkuyu, of a mysterious blight, of a healer working with unusual methods, of Magistrate Vulcan's increasingly tyrannical response, had drawn her to Cappadocia. Vulcan is a symptom himself, Iona continued, of a wider pattern. Across the crumbling empires, as old certainties fade, men like him rise. They offer simplistic answers, demonize what they don't understand, and consolidate power by suppressing any knowledge that challenges their narrow worldview. The silent libraries I seek are filled with the wisdom they fear. Lyra listened, fascinated and a little overwhelmed. Ilara's teachings had always felt profound, but isolated, a secret legacy. Now Iona was placing them within a vast, ancient and persecuted tradition. It was both validating and terrifying. If this geosophia was so widespread, yet so hidden, it meant the forces arrayed against it were powerful and persistent. Iona was particularly intrigued by the obsidian locket and Lyra's account of the Guardians. Such compacts between human wisdom keepers and elemental or chthonic guardians are a recurring motif in the oldest legends, she mused, examining the locket with a scholar's lens. They suggest a time when humanity lived in a more negotiated relationship with the powers of the earth. The serpent, the Ouroboros, is a near-universal symbol of cyclical renewal, of eternity, of the alchemical principle of as above, so below. Davut, meanwhile, recovered his strength, his presence a grounding force in their intellectual explorations. He brought a practical perspective, reminding them of the harsh realities of survival, the dangers posed by Vulcan, and the needs of the common people of Derinkuyu. Theories are well and good, he'd say, whittling a piece of ironwood, but how does this help a child with lung fever, or a village whose well has run sour? His pragmatism was a necessary anchor. Lyra realized that while Iona offered a framework for understanding, and she herself possessed the practical skills of the Viridian path, Davut embodied the crucial link to the community, the human element that gave their knowledge purpose. They were, in their own way, a trinity, mind, craft, and heart. News from Yusuf, when he next arrived, was ominous. Vulcan has allied himself with a faction of hardline priests from the capital, he reported. They have declared Derinkuyu a seat of ancient corruption and are calling for a great inquisition to root out all heresy. They speak of bringing in special interrogators. And Iona, your presence in the city did not go unnoticed. They are looking for the foreign scholar who consorted with the Blight Witch's agent. He meant Davut. The sanctuary in the valley, however hidden, was no longer safe. Their small flame of knowledge was attracting too much attention from a world determined to extinguish it. We cannot stay here, Iona said, her usual composure tinged with urgency. If they find this valley, they will destroy everything. Your work, Lyra, the herbs, any trace of Ilara's legacy. She looked at Lyra. The silent libraries. I have leads on a potential repository, a place where other fragments of this geosophia might be preserved. It is far to the west, across the Great Sea, in lands less consumed by the current brand of fanaticism. It is a perilous journey, but to remain here is to invite certain destruction. Lyra felt a profound conflict. Leave this land, the earth of Cappadocia that held Ilara's spirit, the source of the core lumen. Abandon the people of Derinkuyu to Vulcan's madness. Yet, Iona was right. To stay was to risk everything being lost forever. The Viridian path was not tied to one place, but to the knowledge itself. And knowledge, if it was to survive, sometimes had to migrate. Davut? Lyra looked at her friend. He met her gaze, his own filled with a sad understanding. My place is with my people, Lyra. If I can. I cannot abandon Derinkuyu entirely. Yusuf can help me find a new way to move among them, to continue the work I started in the quarries, to keep the whispers of hope alive. But your knowledge is too precious to be risked in Vulcan's madness. You and Iona must go. Take the Viridian path to these silent libraries. Preserve it. Perhaps one day, when the shadows recede, it can return to heal this land properly. The decision was agonizing, but necessary. Lyra spent the next few days meticulously preparing. She transcribed the most critical sections of Ilara's journals onto thin, oiled hides that could be easily concealed. She gathered seeds from her rarest medicinal plants, carefully packing them in clay and moss. She prepared a small, potent emergency kit of her most effective compounds. The obsidian locket, as always, remained around her neck. The parting was heavy with unspoken emotions. Lyra embraced Davut, a bond forged in shared danger and purpose, now facing an uncertain separation. "Be careful, my friend," she whispered. "And you, Lyra, weaver of light," he replied, his voice thick. "May your path be true." With Yusuf as their initial guide for the first leg of the journey out of the Cappadocian highlands, Lyra and Iona set off, two women carrying a fragile, ancient wisdom, heading towards an unknown future in the west. The sun was setting behind the jagged peaks, painting the sky in hues of fire and amethyst. Lyra looked back one last time at the darkening silhouette of the land that had been her home, her crucible. Derinkuyu, with its deep secrets and its wounded heart, was now behind her. Ahead lay the great sea and the hope of the silent libraries. The Viridian path stretched on, longer and more uncertain than ever, but its purpose, to understand, to heal, to preserve the delicate balance of a world teetering on the brink, burned brighter than ever within her. The journey westward was a tapestry of hardship and discovery. Yusuf guided Lyra and Iona through treacherous mountain passes and across sun-scorched plains, relying on a network of sympathetic traders and hidden way stations, remnants, Iona suggested, of older, less restricted trade routes that had once facilitated the flow of not just goods, but ideas. Lyra, accustomed to the enclosed world of Derinkuyu and her secluded valley, found the vastness of the Anatolian landscape both exhilarating and intimidating. She observed new plants, different soil compositions, strange atmospheric phenomena, meticulously recording her observations in a small coded journal, her Viridian path training seeing the world as a complex interplay of energies and substances. Iona, in turn, proved to be an invaluable companion. Her scholarly knowledge provided context for Lyra's intuitive understanding. She could identify architectural remnants from forgotten civilizations, decipher inscriptions on weathered stones, and speak of the historical currents that had shaped the lands they traversed. She also possessed a surprising resilience and a dry wit that helped lighten their often grueling days. "The fanatics, like Vulcan," Iona remarked one evening as they shared a meager meal of dried fruit and hard bread, "they fear what they cannot categorize. Your craft, Lyra, combines meticulous observation, what some would call natural philosophy, with an intuitive understanding of unseen connections. This synthesis is what terrifies them. It implies a world more complex, more subtle than their rigid dogmas allow. They learn to read the signs of danger, the sudden absence of birds, the wary silence of a village, the distant dust cloud of a Roman patrol, or, increasingly, the black-robed riders of the Inquisitors Vulcan had allied with, whose influence seemed to be spreading like a shadow from the east. After many weeks, Yusuf left them near a small, bustling port city on the Aegean coast, a place where 100 dialects mingled and ships from across the Great Sea jostled for space in the harbour. "From here your path lies on water," he said, pressing a small pouch of coins into Iona's hand. "May the winds be favourable, and your knowledge find safe harbour." Finding passage was not easy. Two women travelling alone, carrying little visible wealth but an aura of quiet intensity, drew suspicion. But Iona's fluency in several languages and her carefully presented credentials as a scholar, seeking access to libraries in Rhodes or Crete, eventually secured them a place on a cramped merchant cog carrying wine, olives, and Anatolian carpets to the western islands. The sea voyage was a new kind of trial for Lyra. The vast, restless expanse of water, so different from the solid, comforting earth of Cappadocia, initially filled her with a profound unease. But as days turned into weeks, she began to see its patterns, its own Viridian path, the flow of currents, the dance of wind and wave, the subtle shifts in light and colour that presaged changes in weather. She even found herself studying the phosphorescence in their wake at night, wondering at the tiny organisms that created such ethereal light, another hidden wonder of the natural world. Iona, meanwhile, spent her time poring over star charts and fragmented maps she had procured, discussing their destination with Lyra. "The place I seek is not a grand public library," she explained. "It is said to be a hidden scriptorium, maintained by a reclusive order on a remote island in the Cygnus archipelago. They call themselves the Custodians of the Unburnt. Legend says they rescued texts from the Great Library of Alexandria before its final destruction, and have been silently gathering other suppressed knowledge ever since. The Cygnus Archipelago. The name itself sounded like a myth. Lyra felt a thrill of anticipation mixed with apprehension. If such a place existed, it would be a sanctuary unlike any she could imagine. But it would also, inevitably, be a target for those who feared what it contained. Their journey was not without peril. A fierce storm battered their ship for 3 days, leaving them battered and off course. They were boarded once by pirates, but Iona's quick thinking and Lyra's discreet use of a pungent, disorienting powder from her emergency kit, a Viridian Path specialty for discouraging unwanted attention without causing lasting harm, convinced the pirates they were poor, plague-ridden pilgrims, and they were left alone, albeit with lighter purses. Finally, after what felt like an age, they sighted land, a string of rugged volcanic islands, rising like dark swans from the turquoise sea. This was the Cygnus Archipelago. Following Iona's cryptic charts, they persuaded their reluctant captain to put them ashore on the most remote and inhospitable-looking of the islands, a place of black cliffs and swirling mists. As the merchant cog sailed away, leaving them alone on a desolate beach, Lyra felt a profound sense of isolation. But Iona's eyes were bright with excitement. "This is it, Lyra," she breathed. "If the legends are true, the entrance to the scriptorium of the Unburnt is hidden somewhere within these cliffs." Their search took days. The island was a maze of volcanic rock, hidden coves and treacherous goat paths. They were beginning to lose hope when Lyra, her senses attuned to subtle energies, noticed something. A faint, almost imperceptible warmth emanating from a section of cliff face that looked no different from the rest. It was the same kind of telluric resonance she had felt at the entrance to the Serpent's Coil and near Alara's most potent workings. She held the obsidian locket against the rock. As before, it seemed to grow darker, and the 7 indentations pulsed with a soft internal light. And then, a section of the cliff face, a perfectly cut slab of black basalt, slides silently inwards, revealing a dark, tunnel-like entrance. A figure stood framed in the opening, cloaked and hooded, holding a simple oil lamp. The light illuminated a serene, age-lined face and eyes that held a calm, ancient wisdom. "You were expected," the figure said, their voice a soft, genderless whisper. "The currents of knowledge flow in strange and often hidden ways. Welcome, Lyra of the Viridian Path, and Iona, seeker of the silent libraries. The custodians of the Unburnt bid you enter. Your journey has been long, but perhaps here some of your burdens may be shared, and your wisdom find fertile ground." Lyra and Iona exchanged a look of stunned, hopeful disbelief. They had found it. A sanctuary, not just of stone, but of knowledge, a flickering candle of understanding in a world increasingly shadowed by fear and ignorance. The path ahead was still unknown, but for the first time in a very long time, Lyra felt she might truly be home. It was not a grand edifice, but a series of interconnected chambers and tunnels carved deep into the volcanic heart of the island, reminiscent of Derinkuyu in its subterranean nature, yet suffused with a profound sense of peace and scholarly dedication. The air was cool and dry, smelling faintly of old parchment, beeswax, and the subtle mineral scent of the living rock. Soft light emanated from cleverly placed light shafts and perpetually burning lamps fueled by a clear, odorless oil Lyra didn't recognize. Their guide, who introduced themselves simply as the archivist, led them through winding passages lined with shelves holding not just scrolls and codices, but also strange scientific instruments, celestial charts, botanical specimens, and geological samples. Lyra's fingers itched to examine everything. "We are not merely collectors of texts," the archivist explained, their voice a soft murmur that seemed to blend with the island's subtle hum. "We are preservers of understanding, in all its forms. The Viridian Path, Geosophia, the star law of the desert nomads, the tidal harmonies of the island weavers, all are threads in the same great tapestry of wisdom that describes the world and our place within it." They were brought to simple, clean chambers, offered food, fresh fish, strange, delicious fruits, and a nutty bread, and then invited to rest. But neither Lyra nor Iona could sleep easily, their minds buzzing with the implications of what they had found. Over the following weeks, they were gradually introduced to the small community of custodians. They were a diverse group. Men and women of all ages, from various lands, each a specialist in some area of suppressed or forgotten knowledge. There was a quiet intensity about them, a shared dedication to their sacred task of preservation and study. They asked Lyra and Iona many questions, listening with rapt attention to their accounts of Derinkuyu, of Magistrate Vulcan, of Ilara's work, and of Iona's search for the silent libraries. Lyra, in turn, was granted access to sections of the scriptorium that resonated with the Viridian Path. She found texts that elaborated on Ilara's cryptic notes, treatises on mineral affinities that went far beyond her master's understanding, detailed anatomical charts of plants she had only dreamed of, and complex theories on telluric currents and planetary influences that made her head spin. She learned that the core lumen fungus was known to the custodians, who cultivated a small, sustainable colony in a geothermal chamber deep within the island, using its properties for purification and healing within their own community. Iona, meanwhile, was in a scholar's paradise, cross-referencing texts, debating theories with other custodians, and confirming many of her hypotheses about the interconnectedness of ancient wisdom traditions. She discovered, to her excitement, that the custodians possessed fragments of texts believed to have been lost in the burning of Alexandria, and even older Mesopotamian astronomical tablets that challenged conventional chronologies. Yet, this sanctuary was not without its own anxieties. The archivist explained that their island, while remote and magically shielded by ancient techniques, which Lyra recognized as advanced applications of Viridian Path principles, was not invulnerable. The forces that Vulcan represents are growing stronger in the world, the archivist said, their serene face troubled. They have longer arms than you might imagine. We, too, have had to relocate, more than once in our long history. The price of knowledge is eternal vigilance. One day, Lyra was working in a geothermal alchemy lab, far more advanced than her workshop in Derinkuyu, with self-regulating heat sources and tools of exquisite precision, attempting to replicate and refine one of Ilara's more complex formulas for neutralizing soil toxins. She was using the core lumen from the custodian's own supply. As she worked, the archivist observed her, their gaze thoughtful. "Your hands possess the gift, Lyra," the archivist said. "Not just the knowledge, but the intuition, the empathy with the substances themselves. Ilara taught you well, but your path, I sense, is not solely one of preservation, as ours primarily is. The Viridian Path, in its truest form, is also about active mending." Lyra looked up, her brow furrowed. I tried to mend Derinkuyu, but I was one woman against a tide of fear." "Perhaps the vessel was too small then," the archivist mused, "or perhaps the methods needed refinement. Here, you have access to knowledge that can amplify your abilities, allow you to work on a larger scale, with greater precision, and perhaps with more subtle influence." They gestured to the humming, complex array of apparatus around them. "We have studied not just the what of these ancient arts, Lyra, but the how, and most importantly the why, and the when." The archivist then showed Lyra a section of the scriptorium she hadn't seen before. It was a vast, spherical chamber, the walls of which were a living star chart, the constellations shifting and moving in accordance with the actual heavens, projected by some unknown means. In the centre of the chamber was a shallow pool of water, dark and still as a scrying glass. "This is the orbis," the archivist said, "the eye of the world. Here we observe the currents, not just of stars and tides, but of potential, of arising needs. Of places where the balance is critically threatened, and where intervention, if skillfully applied, might tip the scales back towards harmony." As Lyra gazed into the pool, the dark water swirled and an image formed, not sharp like a reflection, but hazy, impressionistic, yet undeniably recognizable. The plains of Cappadocia, the dark silhouette of the Hassan Dar volcano, and nestled at its foot, the faint, sprawling outline of Derinkuyu. But the image was sick. A dark, oily sheen seemed to cover the land, and the light emanating from Derinkuyu itself was faint, flickering like a dying ember. "Derinkuyu?" Lyra whispered, her heart clenching. "What is happening?" "Vulcan's final purification has begun," the archivist said gravely. "He has brought in engineers from the capital, with new destructive mining techniques, seeking to exploit the deep mineral wealth he believes will bring him favor and power. He is tearing at the very roots of the mountains, heedless of the consequences. The blight you witnessed was but a precursor. What he is unleashing now, it is a catastrophic imbalance, a deep wounding of the earth that will poison not just Derinkuyu, but the entire region for generations, if it is not stopped. Lyra stared at the sickening image, horror and a fierce, protective anger rising within her. Elara's valley, Davut, the struggling hope of Derinkuyu's people, all were threatened by Vulcan's blind greed and ambition. "Can anything be done?" Iona asked, having entered the Orbis chamber behind them, her face pale. The archivist looked at Lyra. "The knowledge exists here, the potential for a counter-resonance, a great harmonizing on a scale Elara only dreamed of. But it would require a willing agent, someone with the skill, the courage, and the deep connection to that specific land, to that specific imbalance. It would require a master of the Viridian path to return to the source of the wound." Lyra knew, with a certainty that resonated to her very core, what she had to do. Her time in the scriptorium, her access to its profound wisdom, had not just been for her own learning, it had been a preparation. The Viridian path was not a retreat from the world, but a deep engagement with it. And her world, the world of Derinkuyu, was calling her back. "Teach me," Lyra said to the archivist, her voice low but steady, her eyes fixed on the blighted image of her homeland. "Teach me what I need to know. I will go back." The Sanctuary of the Unburnt had given her knowledge. Now it was time to turn that knowledge into action. The cost would be immense, the danger absolute. But Lyra was no longer just Elara's apprentice. She was a practitioner in her own right, armed with the wisdom of ages and a fierce, unwavering love for a land and a people on the brink of annihilation. The true test of the Viridian path was about to begin. Current part characters 4,000. Total characters 64,000. The following months were a period of intense, focused study and preparation for Lyra, unlike anything she had ever experienced. Under the direct tutelage of the archivist and other specialized custodians, she delved into the deepest, most esoteric aspects of the Viridian path and Geosophia. She learned techniques for sensing and mapping telluric currents on a vast scale, for creating resonant frequencies that could soothe or stimulate the Earth's energies, and for working with crystalline structures not just as amplifiers, but as conscious conduits of natural power. She studied ancient hydrological charts, learning how the vast underground water systems of Cappadocia connected seemingly disparate regions, and how poisoning at one source could spread catastrophically. She learned of dragon lines, major terrestrial energy pathways, and how Vulcan's destructive mining, if it intersected with one of these, could trigger not just environmental collapse, but seismic instability. Iona worked alongside her, her role transforming from fellow seeker to invaluable research assistant and strategist. Iona's historical knowledge helped Lyra understand the deep-rooted cultural and political contexts of Cappadocia, identifying potential allies and vulnerabilities within Vulcan's regime. She also began to document Lyra's work, recognizing its profound significance for the future of Geosophia. The custodians did not just offer knowledge, they provided resources. They helped Lyra craft a new set of tools, finer and more potent than any she had possessed before, made from rare alloys and charged crystals. They synthesized a more concentrated, stable form of the core luminescence, and taught her how to create seed crystals, small, energetically imprinted crystals that could be used to initiate a harmonizing resonance across a wide area, given the right conditions and a focal point. "You will not be able to confront Vulcan directly with force, Lyra," the archivist cautioned. "His power is too entrenched, his fanaticism too absolute. Your task is not to defeat him, but to heal the wound he is inflicting upon the land. If the land begins to heal, if the waters clear, if the earth ceases to tremble under his violations, then his power base, built on fear and exploitation, will crumble." Their plan was audacious. Lyra would return to Cappadocia, not directly to Derinkuyu, but to the remote highlands, to the Chamber of Echoing Waters and the Guardian's Cavern. This, they had determined through the Orbis, was a primary nexus of telluric energy for the entire region, a true heart of the stone. From there, using the knowledge and tools she now possessed, she would attempt the Great Harmonizing, a complex, sustained, ritualistic process designed to calm the disturbed Earth energies, neutralize the deep Earth toxins Vulcan's mining was releasing, and stimulate the land's natural regenerative capacities. It would be incredibly dangerous. She would be a beacon of concentrated viridian energy, potentially detectable by those sensitive to such things, or by Vulcan's increasingly paranoid inquisitors, and the process itself would be draining, requiring immense concentration and personal energetic expenditure over several days. Davut's role, if he could be reached, would be crucial. He would need to work within Derinkuyu, preparing the people, guiding them to protect the purest water sources, and, if possible, subtly disrupting Vulcan's most destructive operations from within, creating the space and time Lyra needed. The journey back was even more perilous than the first. The custodians arranged passage on a smuggler's ship, one accustomed to navigating the hidden coves and avoiding the increasingly vigilant patrols of the expanding Imperial forces allied with figures like Vulcan. Iona, to Lyra's initial surprise, insisted on accompanying her part of the way. "My place is ultimately with the scriptorium, Lyra," Iona said. "But this is a pivotal moment. The active application of Geosophia on such a scale has not been attempted for centuries. I must document what I can, and perhaps my knowledge of languages and local customs can be of assistance in reaching Davut." They made landfall on a deserted stretch of the Anatolian coast, far south of the port city they had departed from. From there, it was a grueling overland trek, through lawless territories and regions already showing the early signs of the spreading ecological distress: failed crops, strangely coloured streams, an unseasonable sickness among the wildlife. They managed to get a message to Yusuf, the travelling merchant, via a network of contacts Iona had cultivated. The meeting was arranged in a ruined Hittite watchtower overlooking a desolate valley. Yusuf was shocked by the changes in Lyra, not in her appearance, though she was leaner, harder, but in her aura. There was a new depth to her, a quiet power that was almost palpable. He listened intently as they outlined their desperate plan. "Davut is still in Derinkuyu," Yusuf confirmed. "He moves in the deepest shadows, a legend more than a man. They call him the Earth Mole now. He has a network small but loyal. Getting a message to him, coordinating, it will be difficult but not impossible." He paused. "Vulcan has become a true tyrant. The city groans under his heel. The quarries run day and night. There have been tremors. Small ones, but enough to frighten people. They say the mountains are angry." "They are," Lyra said grimly, "and they will grow angrier if this is not stopped." Iona decided to remain with Yusuf for a time, to act as a liaison, a secure point of communication between Lyra in the highlands and Davut in Derinkuyu, using her scholarly skills to help encode and decode messages. It was a dangerous role, but she accepted it without hesitation. Lyra, alone once more, but armed with knowledge and purpose, began her ascent into the remote Cappadocian highlands towards the Guardian's cavern. The journey was a pilgrimage, each step taken with a profound awareness of the wounded earth beneath her feet. She could feel the discord, the pain of the land, like a physical ache in her own body. She reached the hidden entrance to the Serpent's Coil, the obsidian locket granting her passage. The Guardians were there, in their vast, luminous cavern. They greeted her not with aggression, but with a solemn, expectant stillness. It was as if they, too, sensed the urgency, the critical nature of her return. They allowed her to approach the great central crystal, the heart of their sanctuary, the place where the viridian energies of the region converged most powerfully. This was where she would make her stand, not with weapons but with wisdom, not to conquer but to heal. She laid out her tools, the seed crystals, the refined core lumen. She touched the great crystal, cool and alive beneath her palm. Then, closing her eyes, Lyra began to weave the complex patterns of the great harmonizing, her focused will a conduit for the ancient, life-giving energies of the Viridian path, a silent, desperate prayer for a world on the brink. The fate of Cappadocia, and perhaps much more, hung in the balance. The great harmonizing was unlike any work Lyra had ever undertaken. It was not a simple ritual, but a sustained, dynamic interaction with the telluric currents, a constant adjustment and rebalancing of energies. For days she remained in the Guardian's cavern, moving little, eating and drinking almost nothing, her entire being focused on the task. She used the seed crystals, placing them at specific points around the great central crystal, creating a resonant matrix. The obsidian locket, placed upon the apex of the crystal, acted as her primary focal point, amplifying her intent and her connection to the viridian energies. The refined core luminescence applied in minute quantities to the seed crystals helped to purify and stabilize the energetic flows. It was like conducting a vast, silent orchestra. She could feel the discordant vibrations from Vulcan's destructive mining, the toxic signatures of the released poisons, the stressed, fractured aura of the land itself. With painstaking precision, she began to introduce counter-frequencies, soothing resonances, patterns of healing energy drawn from the deep, untouched aquifers and the stable ancient bedrock channeled through the great crystal. The Guardians remained nearby, silent, watchful presences. Sometimes Lyra would feel a subtle shift in their energy, a supportive hum that seemed to bolster her own flagging reserves. They were, in their own way, participating, lending their ancient strength to her endeavour. Meanwhile, in Derinkuyu, Davut received Lyra's coded message via Yusuf and Iona's careful network. The instructions were precise: to identify and protect the few remaining uncorrupted deep wells, to guide people away from areas where the earth tremors were strongest, and, if possible, to subtly disrupt the flow of materials to Vulcan's most destructive quarrying sites. Davut, with his small band of loyalists, former quarrymen he had helped, families grateful for Lyra's healing, set to work. They moved like ghosts in the lower city, marking safe water sources, spreading warnings about unstable tunnels and creating inexplicable delays and accidents at the mining operations. A crucial shipment of sharpening tools for the rock-cutting machines would vanish. A key support beam in a new tunnel would unexpectedly crack, forcing its closure. These were small acts of sabotage, but they bought Lyra precious time. The people of Derinkuyu, already primed by Lyra's earlier message from the Chamber of Echoing Waters and by Davut's quiet work, began to notice subtle changes. The tremors, which had been increasing in frequency and intensity, seemed to lessen slightly, to lose some of their jarring violence. The water from certain old wells, which Davut's network had discreetly cleared of recent surface contamination, tasted sweeter, purer. A faint, almost imperceptible vitality seemed to be returning to the very air they breathed in the deep levels. Vulcan, however, was oblivious, or willfully blind to these subtle shifts. Enraged by the disruptions to his quarrying and the continued whispers of Lyra's influence, he intensified his crackdown. More arrests were made. Public denunciations became more frequent, his rhetoric more unhinged. He was a man consumed by his own power, deaf to the groans of the wounded land. In the Guardian's cavern, Lyra felt the strain. The effort of maintaining the harmonizing was immense. Her body ached, her mind reeled with fatigue. She was pushing herself to the very limits of her endurance. But she could also feel the response from the earth, a gradual calming, a slow, hesitant return to equilibrium. The toxic signatures were fading, the fractured energies beginning to knit back together. Then, on the seventh day, as she was deep in a trance-like state of focused will, a new, violent tremor shook the cavern. It was different from the mining-related disturbances, sharper, more profound, originating from far deeper within the earth. The great crystal before her flickered erratically, its light dimming. The Guardians let out a chorus of distressed guttural hisses, their massive forms agitated. Lyra's eyes snapped open, her heart pounding with a new fear. The orbis at the scriptorium had shown the danger of Vulcan's mining, but it also hinted at older, deeper instabilities within the Cappadocian substrata, ancient fault lines that his reckless excavations might inadvertently reactivate. This was it. A major seismic event triggered by Vulcan's relentless assault on the land's integrity. She had to redouble her efforts, to pour every last ounce of her strength, every fragment of her knowledge, into stabilizing the telluric currents, into soothing the enraged earth before it tore itself and Derinkuyu apart. The great harmonizing had just become a desperate race against catastrophic collapse. The fate of the entire region now rested on her shoulders, and on the fragile, luminous threads of the Viridian path. Current part characters, 4,000. Total characters, 72,000. The cavern floor bucked again, more violently this time. Dust and small stones rained from the roof. The great crystal at the cavern's heart pulsed with a frantic, disharmonious light, mirroring the earth's agony. Lyra clung to it, her own body trembling, fighting to maintain her focus amidst the chaos. The Viridian energies she was channeling felt like wild horses, threatening to bolt from her control. She could feel the deep earth trauma, the tearing of ancient rock strata, the sudden, violent release of pent-up pressures. Vulcan's folly had awakened something terrible, a geological fury that dwarfed even his destructive ambition. Balance. Alara's voice echoed in her memory, a calm anchor in the storm. Meet force not with force, but with harmony. Find the node of dissonance and soothe it. Lyra forced herself to go deeper into the Viridian trance, pushing past her fear, her exhaustion. She extended her senses through the telluric currents, searching for the epicenter of the seismic disturbance, the precise point where the Earth's energy was most violently ruptured. It was far below even these deep caverns, a place of unimaginable pressure and heat. She couldn't stop the earthquake, not directly. But perhaps, if she could reinforce the energetic integrity of the surrounding rock matrix, if she could create a kind of Viridian shield, she could dampen its most destructive effects, guide the released energy along less catastrophic pathways, and prevent the utter collapse of Derinkuyu and the surrounding region. The Guardians, sensing the shift in her intent, the sheer desperate power she was now wielding, pressed closer, their massive bodies forming a protective circle around her and the crystal. They began a low, guttural chant, a sound that vibrated through the very stone, adding their ancient energies to hers, a primal harmony against the Earth's rage. In Derinkuyu, the world turned into a nightmare. Tunnels cracked, sections of ceiling collapsed. The screams of terrified people echoed through the warrens. Davut, working with his small team, risked his own life countless times, pulling people from collapsing dwellings, guiding them towards the more stable, ancient core of the city, trying to prevent panic from turning into a deadly stampede. Vulcan, in his fortified chambers in the upper city, was thrown from his feet. His arrogant certainty was, for the first time, shaken by a primal fear. This was no mere tremor. This was the earth itself rising in judgment. His guards were useless, his pronouncements meaningless against such elemental fury. Lyra poured everything she had into the great harmonizing. Her nose began to bleed from the strain, her vision blurred. The Viridian energy flowing through her was a torrent, threatening to consume her. But she held on, her will an unbreakable thread. She visualized the network of telluric currents beneath Cappadocia, seeing them not as fractured and chaotic, but as a living web. She gently, persistently, nudged the raging energies away from the most vulnerable structures of Derinkuyu, reinforcing the natural faults and ancient lava tubes that could act as pressure release valves. It felt like an eternity, battling the raging earth, her consciousness teetering on the brink of dissolution. But slowly, agonizingly, she began to feel a change. The violent, chaotic vibrations started to lessen, the sharp, tearing sensations in the telluric web smoothing out. The Earth's fury was not spent, but it was, being guided, see. The worst of the seismic shockwave was passing. Finally, with a last, shuddering sigh that ran through the entire mountain, the tremors subsided, leaving behind a ringing silence, broken only by Lyra's ragged gasps and the soft, exhausted pants of the Guardians. She sagged against the great crystal, utterly drained, her body slick with sweat, her limbs trembling uncontrollably. The light from the crystal was dim now, its energy depleted, but it was steady. The cavern, though scarred with fresh cracks, had held. She had done it. She had faced the primal rage of the earth and, with the wisdom of the Viridian path and the aid of the Guardians, had managed to shield Derinkuyu from the worst of its cataclysmic potential. It took a long time for Lyra to recover even a fraction of her strength. The Guardians brought her water from their pure spring and small, energy-rich fungi that tasted of deep earth and starlight. Slowly the world stopped spinning. When she was finally able to stand, she knew her work in the cavern was done. The immediate crisis was averted. The longer-term healing of the land would take time, generations perhaps, but the great harmonizing had laid the foundation, stabilized the deepest wounds. Her thoughts turned to Derinkuyu, to Davut, to Iona. She needed to know what had become of them. The journey back through the serpent's coil was slow, her body protesting every movement. But when she finally reached the familiar levels of Derinkuyu, she found a city shaken, scarred, but not destroyed. Many of the newer, more shoddily built sections had collapsed, particularly those associated with Vulcan's recent expansions. But the ancient core, the deep warrens that Davut had guided people towards, had largely held. She found Davut near one of the main wells, organizing rescue efforts, his face grimed with dust but alive with a fierce determination. When he saw Lyra, his eyes widened and he rushed to embrace her, a hug that spoke volumes of relief and shared ordeal. "Lyra, you're alive. We thought. The mountain, it seemed to tear itself apart." "The worst is over, Davut," she said, her voice weak but clear. "The earth is settling. But Vulcan?" Davut's face hardened. His citadel in the upper levels suffered heavy damage. His authority, it shattered with the first great tremor. When the very stones he commanded turned against him, his pronouncements of power became empty boasts. People saw that his order was an illusion, his strength a fraud against the true power of the earth. Many of his guards deserted. He is isolated, enraged, but toothless for now. News of Lyra's survival and her perceived role in calming the earth, for the survivors, her actions were now indistinguishable from benevolent magic, spread quickly. She was no longer the Blight Witch, but the Earth Mender, the guardian of the deeps. In the days that followed, a fragile new order began to emerge in Derinkuyu. Led by Davut and other respected community elders, the people started to rebuild, not with Vulcan's grandiose plans, but with a new respect for the ancient ways, for the stability of the deep earth. They cleared the passages, cared for the injured, and shared what little resources they had. Iona, Yusuf had managed to get word, was safe, having taken refuge with a remote community of semi-nomadic herders when the earthquakes began. She was already documenting the geological effects, her scholar's mind piecing together the true scale of Vulcan's folly and Lyra's intervention. As for Vulcan, he was eventually found cowering in the ruins of his chambers, his spirit broken, his power utterly gone. He was quietly exiled from Derinkuyu, a pariah stripped of everything, left to wander the recovering plains, a living testament to the consequences of blind ambition and disrespect for the natural order. Lyra did not seek power or accolades. Her work was in the shadows, in the quiet mending. She helped Davut and the others identify safe new water sources, taught them which minerals to avoid in their rebuilding and how to cultivate purifying plants in the subterranean gardens. She shared her knowledge freely but simply, allowing the Viridian path to integrate naturally into the city's recovering life. Her locket, the obsidian serpent, still lay against her skin. Its work and hers was not truly finished. The earth, like a human body, would need long, patient care to fully heal. But as she looked at the people of Derinkuyu, their faces still etched with hardship, but now also with a resilient hope, as she felt the slow, steady pulse of the recovering land beneath her feet, Lyra knew that the Viridian path, the ancient wisdom of balance and harmony, had found fertile ground once more in the heart of Cappadocia. The darkness had been met, not with more darkness, but with a persistent, unwavering light. And for now, that was enough. The echoes of her actions, like the whispers in the chamber of echoing waters, would resonate for generations to come. Winter's chill gave way to the vibrant, fleeting bloom of spring on the plains, then the sun-baked stillness of summer. Deep within Derinkuyu, life found a new, more cautious equilibrium. The cataclysmic earthquakes, though leaving scars on both the city and its people, had also acted as a harsh purgative, sweeping away Vulcan's oppressive regime and forcing a return to more sustainable, community-focused ways. Lyra remained in Derinkuyu, not as a ruler or a prophetess, but as a quiet advisor, a teacher, a healer. The title Earth Mender stuck, spoken with a mixture of reverence and affection. She worked closely with Davut, who had naturally emerged as a respected leader, his pragmatism and deep love for the city guiding its reconstruction. Together they helped establish a council of elders, drawing on the wisdom of craftsmen, healers, and long-time residents to make decisions for the community. Her primary focus was the slow, patient work of environmental restoration. She taught the people of Derinkuyu the principles of the Viridian path, how to read the health of the land, how to identify and utilize purifying plants, how to work with the stone and water, not against it. Small, terraced gardens, irrigated by carefully managed water from the deeper uncorrupted wells, began to appear in torch-lit caverns, producing vital herbs and vegetables. The air in the lower levels, once thick with dust and the taint of the Blight, gradually grew cleaner, fresher. She established a small scriptorium of her own, not as grand as the one on the island of the Unburnt, but a vital repository of Alara's journals and her own accumulating knowledge. She took on a few carefully chosen apprentices, young men and women who showed an aptitude for the Viridian path, not just an intellectual curiosity, but the necessary patience, empathy, and respect for the natural world. Among them was Elif, Davut's daughter, now a bright, inquisitive girl, her earlier brush with the Blight having instilled in her a profound interest in Lyra's healing arts. Iona returned to Derinkuyu some months after the earthquakes, her own journeys having been disrupted by the regional instability. She brought with her detailed observations of the quake's aftermath across Cappadocia and news from the wider world. The fall of Vulcan, she reported, had sent ripples through the provincial power structures. Other local despots who had relied on similar models of exploitation were facing increased scrutiny and unrest. The Cappadocian quake, as it was becoming known, was seen by some as an omen, a sign that the old ways of unchecked power were unsustainable. Iona and Lyra worked together, blending Iona's broad scholarly knowledge with Lyra's deep, practical understanding of geosophia. They began to create a comprehensive record of the Viridian path, translating Alara's coded journals into a clearer, more accessible language, adding their own observations and discoveries. Their hope was to create a body of knowledge that could be shared carefully with other communities facing similar blights, be they environmental or societal. The obsidian locket remained Lyra's constant companion. She now understood more of its significance. It was not just a key or a symbol of lineage, but a kind of energetic tuning fork, capable of resonating with and subtly influencing the telluric currents. The twin serpents at the heart of the stone were not literal creatures, but a metaphor for the dual, intertwined energies, creative and destructive, masculine and feminine, growth and decay, that flowed through the earth, and which the Viridian path sought to keep in harmony. One day, Yusuf, the merchant, arrived with an unexpected visitor, a frail, elderly man, a custodian from the scriptorium of the Unburnt, bearing a message from the archivist. "The currents you set in motion, Earthmender," the old custodian said, his eyes, though faded with age, holding a deep wisdom, "have resonated further than you know. The orbis shows a quickening. Other communities, inspired by whispers of Derinkuyu's resilience, are beginning to question, to seek out the forgotten ways. The knowledge you have rekindled here, it is needed elsewhere." The archivist, the message conveyed, invited Lyra and Iona, if she chose, to return periodically to the scriptorium, not just as students, but as contributing masters, to share their practical experiences of applying geosophia in a real-world crisis, and to help guide the dissemination of this vital wisdom to other parts of a world increasingly out of balance. Lyra looked at Davut, at Elif, who now stood beside her, her young apprentice. She looked at the slowly healing heart of Derinkuyu. Her work here was not finished, perhaps it never would be. But the Viridian path was not meant to be hoarded in one place. It was a living tradition, meant to flow, to adapt, to heal wherever the need arose. "Derinkuyu is strong now," Davut said, understanding the unspoken question in her eyes. "It has found its balance again, thanks to you. We will keep the path you have shown us. Go, Lyra, share your light. This valley, this city, will always be your home, a testament to your courage." And so, Lyra's journey continued. She did not abandon Derinkuyu, returning often to teach, to heal, to consult with the council, but she also travelled with Iona, sometimes to the scriptorium of the Unburnt, sometimes to other remote communities where the ancient threads of geosophia were being rediscovered. She became a weaver of connections, a quiet force for healing in a fractured world. She never sought power, never wore a crown or claimed a title beyond the one the people of Derinkuyu had given her, Earthmender. Her legacy was not in monuments of stone, but in clean water, fertile earth, healthy children, and communities learning to live in harmony with the deep, resonant energies of the world. The obsidian locket still lay against her skin, a constant reminder of the delicate balance she served, a symbol of the enduring, life-giving power of the Viridian path. The soot and struggle of her early life in the hidden workshop had been transmuted, not into gold, but into a far more precious wisdom, the wisdom to listen to the earth and to help it heal. And in that she found her truest purpose, her most profound peace. The journey that had begun in the shadowed depths of Cappadocia now stretched out towards a horizon filled with the quiet, persistent promise of renewal. Years passed. Lyra became a name whispered with respect in hidden communities from the Anatolian highlands to the distant Western Isles. She and Iona, often accompanied by a rotating group of apprentices from the scriptorium or from places like Derinkuyu, established a network of way stations of knowledge. These were not grand academies, but small, discreet centres. A secluded mountain library here, a coastal cave system there, even a hidden floor within a bustling city's guild hall, where the principles of Geosophia and the Viridian Path could be studied and adapted to local needs. They faced constant challenges. Suspicious rulers, dogmatic priesthoods, and the ever-present threat of those who sought to exploit knowledge for power rather than healing. There were setbacks, betrayals, moments when the darkness seemed overwhelming. But the network held, sustained by the quiet courage of individuals and the undeniable efficacy of the wisdom they shared. They learned to operate like the mycelial networks beneath the forest floor, unseen but deeply interconnected, sharing nutrients and information, fostering resilience. Davut, in Derinkuyu, became a revered elder, his practical wisdom guiding the city through periods of drought, through disputes with surface settlements, through the ever-present temptation to revert to easier, more exploitative ways. He ensured that Lyra's teachings, and the memory of Vulcan's disastrous reign, remained a living part of the city's heritage. Elif, his daughter, grew into a skilled healer in her own right, her understanding of the Viridian Path deeply rooted in her love for her community and the Cappadocian earth. She became one of Lyra's most trusted correspondents, a vital link to the ongoing health of Derinkuyu. The scriptorium of the Unburnt, with the archivist's continued guidance, evolved. It became less a passive repository and more an active hub for the network Lyra and Iona were building, a place where knowledge from disparate traditions could be synthesized, debated, and then carefully disseminated. The Orbis, the eye of the world, was used not just to observe, but to anticipate crises, allowing the network to proactively offer aid or warning to vulnerable regions. Lyra never lost her hands-on connection to the Viridian Path. She would still spend weeks at a time in remote wilderness, studying the flow of energies, experimenting with new botanical compounds, or simply sitting in silent communion with the earth, recharging her own spiritual and energetic reserves. The obsidian locket, now worn smooth by years of touch, remained her most treasured possession, a tangible link to Alara, to the Guardians, and to the deeper, resonant heart of the world. She saw the slow, incremental healing of lands that had once been blighted. She witnessed communities, once fractured by fear and scarcity, begin to cooperate, to rediscover their own local traditions of sustainable living, often finding that their ancestral wisdom echoed the core principles of Geosophia. The great harmonizing was not a single event, she realized, but an ongoing process, a lifetime's work, a commitment passed from one generation to the next. There was no grand victory, no final vanquishing of ignorance or greed. The forces that Vulcan had embodied would always exist, in different guises, in different eras. But Lyra had learned that the response was not to meet them with equal and opposite force, but with persistent, patient, and deeply rooted alternatives. To build resilience from the ground up, to empower individuals and communities with the knowledge to heal themselves and their environment. In her later years, her hair now streaked with silver like the moon-petal lichen, Lyra often found herself back in Cappadocia, not in the depths of Derinkuyu, but in the quiet, hidden valley where her journey with Alara had begun. The scars of the old fire had faded, replaced by a lush growth of herbs and wildflowers. The spring still ran pure. Here, surrounded by her apprentices, she would teach, not just the techniques of the Viridian Path, but its philosophy. The profound responsibility that came with understanding, the sacred duty to protect the delicate balance of life. One evening, as a new generation of students gathered around a smokeless fire, listening to her stories of the Guardians, of the Chamber of Echoing Waters, of the terrifying beauty of the Great Harmonizing, Elif, now a respected elder herself, visiting from Derinkuyu, asked her, "Lyra, after all you have seen, all you have faced, do you believe the world can truly be mended? Lyra looked up at the vast Anatolian sky, the stars like scattered diamonds on black velvet. She touched the obsidian locket. A faint, familiar warmth spread through her fingers. "The world," she said softly, her voice carrying the wisdom of a life spent listening to the earth, "is always mending itself and always being wounded anew. Our task is not to achieve some perfect final state of healing, for that is an illusion. Our task is to be skillful, compassionate participants in that eternal dance of wounding and mending, to add our small, persistent energies to the side of balance, of harmony, of life. And in that persistence, Elif, lies our truest hope and our deepest peace." Her apprentices listened, their faces illuminated by the firelight, the ancient, enduring wisdom of the Viridian path sinking into their hearts, ready to be carried forward into a world that would always need its healers, its listeners, its quiet guardians of the balance. The journey continued. Current part characters 4,000, total characters 84,000. As Lyra grew older, the network of way stations and practitioners she and Iona had fostered became more robust, yet remained discreet, a testament to their understanding that true influence often lay in subtlety rather than overt power. The knowledge of Geosophia, once fragmented and on the verge of extinction, was now a living, evolving tradition, adapting to the unique ecological and cultural landscapes of diverse regions. Iona, ever the scholar, compiled the Codex of the Harmonized Worlds, a vast work that brought together the disparate threads of earth wisdom from countless cultures, meticulously cross-referenced and annotated with Lyra's practical insights. It was not a static encyclopedia, but a dynamic guide, designed to be updated and expanded by future generations. Copies, laboriously transcribed by hand onto durable vellum or thin sheets of treated bark, began to circulate cautiously among trusted communities. Lyra herself, while still travelling when her strength permitted, spent more and more time in her Cappadocian Valley sanctuary. It had become a place of pilgrimage for those dedicated to the Viridian path. They came not to worship her, for she discouraged such veneration, but to learn from the living ecosystem she had nurtured, to study at the small scriptorium she had founded, and to sit in quiet contemplation by the spring that Elara had first shown her. She never forgot Derinkuyu. Regular communication, facilitated by Yusuf's descendants who continued his vital trade routes, kept her informed of the city's well-being. Derinkuyu had become a model of sustainable subterranean living, its people deeply connected to the rhythms of the earth, their governance based on consensus and a profound respect for the principles Lyra and Davut had instilled. The story of Magistrate Vulcan and the Great Quake served as a potent cautionary tale passed down through generations. The obsidian locket she eventually gifted to Elif's granddaughter, a young woman who showed a prodigious talent for the Viridian path and a spirit as resilient as the Cappadocian rock. "This does not confer power, child," Lyra had told her, her voice frail but her eyes still bright with wisdom. "It confers responsibility. It is a reminder that you are connected to something far older, far vaster than yourself. Listen to it, learn from it, and use what it teaches you to serve the balance." Lyra's final days were spent in her valley, surrounded by the quiet hum of nature and the devoted care of her closest students. She had seen much darkness in her long life, fear, greed, the casual destruction wrought by ignorance, but she had also witnessed incredible courage, profound wisdom, and the enduring capacity of both humanity and the earth to heal, to find harmony even in the wake of devastation. Her passing was as quiet and unassuming as her life. There were no grand pronouncements, no monuments erected, but across scattered communities from the deep caverns of Derinkuyu to the remote island scriptorium of the Unburnt, those who followed the Viridian path felt a subtle shift in the telluric currents, a soft sigh from the earth, as if it were acknowledging the return of one of its most devoted daughters. Her legacy was not in stone or gold, but in the flourishing gardens in once barren lands, in the clean waters of once poisoned wells, in the minds and hearts of those who continued to walk the Viridian path, listening to the ancient wisdom of the earth and working tirelessly, patiently to mend its wounds. It was a legacy whispered on the wind, carried in the scent of healing herbs, and felt in the steady, resilient pulse of a world striving, always striving towards balance. The story of Lyra, the earth mender of Cappadocia, became another thread in the vast ancient tapestry of Geosophia, a beacon for those who would continue the great harmonizing in the ages to come. The challenges would always be there, but so too would the knowledge, the courage, and the unwavering hope for a world in harmony.